Hello and a very special welcome to the annual UK-ASEAN Business Forum hosted by the UK-ASEAN Business Council, the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, and the UK's Department for International Trade. The aim for today is to learn more about Cambodia's chairmanship of ASEAN and to explore how the UK and ASEAN can grow our trade and investment relationship. I'm Alan Lai, based in Brunei, and have two things to note before we begin. Firstly, in addition to our wonderful speakers, it is very important that we also hear from all of you taking part. For those taking part in person, please raise your physical hand and a microphone will be brought over. To those on Zoom, please put the question in the chat function. And please note, the forum is being recorded and a copy will be available via our website. It is now my pleasure to hand over to Ian Gibbons, the CEO of the UK-ASEAN Business Council, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Alan. Ministers, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to everyone here in person in London, those taking part virtually across ASEAN, and the hundreds of people that are joining us online today. But first, thank you very much to HSBC for hosting us, and also to for the support of our other partners for today's forum, and that's Prudential and ACCA. This feels like we're back in business. I'm biased, but I think collectively UK-ABC and all the partner organisations here today have done an absolutely incredible job over the last 2 years. But holding our forum in person, as we would have done pre-pandemic, fills me with great confidence that we're heading in the right direction, because ours is a people business, and that business is about building partnerships. It's about building relationships and working collaboratively here and overseas. And I think we'd all agree that this is most effectively done in environments such as today's. I'm looking forward to today's forum. There's going to be plenty of opportunity to ask questions and take part. But for now, I'd like to invite Sir Sherard Cooper-Coles, Group Head of Public Affairs at HSBC, to make his welcome remarks. Sherard.
Thank you, Ian. Your Excellencies, Ministers, Lord Grimstone, Lady Neville-Rolfe, Mark Garnier, friends of Southeast Asia, welcome. Now, we at HSBC are not doing this just because we love Southeast Asia, though we do love Southeast Asia. We're doing it because we believe from the bottom of our hearts that connecting nations, connecting people, connecting economies makes sense in the modern world. And today, of all days, that could not be more true. And to see a nation like Cambodia leading ASEAN forward, acting, addressing common challenges together, pleases all of us who've known the suffering that that country's been through so much. So welcome to all of you. This does mean we're back in business, connecting post-COVID, post-Brexit Britain with a part of the world with which we have had long and deep connections, and connections which we intend to renew and rebuild and repurpose for the modern world. So thank you, ambassadors, for making the journey to Canary Wharf, ministers for traveling across the ocean and realizing this most important of goals, which is that of addressing common challenges together. Thank you so much for coming on behalf of the HSBC Group.
Thank you very much, Sir Sherard. And now to deliver her welcome remarks and to lead the forum, I'd like to hand over to the chair of the UK-ASEAN Business Council. Baroness Neville-Rolfe is a former UK business minister and board director for Tesco, and now an active peer in the House of Lords with a passion for Southeast Asia. Baroness Neville-Rolfe, chair of the UK-ASEAN Business Council, over to you in London.
Alan, thank you so much. And thank you, Ian and Sherard. And a very good morning or good afternoon to everyone. And I very much welcome my good friend, Lord Grimston of Boscobel, who's Minister for Investment at the Department for International Trade and the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. We also welcome online His Excellency Pan Sorosak. He is the Minister of Commerce in the Kingdom of Cambodia, and my friend H.E. Dato Lim Jok Hoi, Secretary General of ASEAN, joining us virtually. And also Niak Okna Kithmeng, Chair of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, our counterpart in ASEAN. And finally, Ambassador Kan Paridar, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Cambodia, Your Excellencies, members of the diplomatic community, Prime Minister's trade envoys, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's great pleasure that I speak to you both in person and via Zoom at this UK-ASEAN Business Forum. How wonderful to be together physically. Before we begin, I just wanted to start by saying that I think all our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine at this difficult time, and we will be watching developments closely. But returning to ASEAN, the UK is ASEAN's newest dialogue partner in 25 years. So we're delighted that the UK now has a formal relationship with ASEAN countries and the ASEAN community. The UK-ASEAN Business Council, which I chair, has had a long and valued relationship with the ASEAN Business Advisory Council over many years. We appreciate that partnership. Now, last October, our Prime Minister Boris Johnson said at the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit that he was confident that the annual pre-COVID bilateral trade of 40 billion would rise in the coming years as our relationship strengthened. And at the summit, he encouraged us to use our unique relationship to make the most of the green revolution, both in growing our economies and in cutting emissions. We've got a great program today, and we're grateful that so many key figures from the UK and ASEAN political and business community are able to join us both here and online. And I'm sure we can together grow mutually beneficial business and investment. And following on from the dialogue partnership, we now have the opportunity to make an impact and work with UK and ASEAN business to grow trade and encourage UK exports to this vibrant region. The economy of ASEAN in 8 years' time will be the fourth biggest in the world. And it's a young one with 61% under the age of 35. And they're embracing digital technology and want to consume sustainably. And I'd like to say in finishing that it's been a real pleasure to work so closely with His Excellency Ambassador Kan Paridar, the Cambodian ambassador to the UK, to make today possible. We put it in the diary 6 months ago. And I'm also delighted that our partnership with the ASEAN Business Advisory Council continues. So it's my very great pleasure to invite the chairman of the ASEAN BAC Cambodia, Niak Okna Kithmeng, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Excellency Pan Sorosak, Minister of Commerce of the Kingdom of Cambodia, Excellency Dato Lim Jok Hoi, the Secretary General of the ASEAN, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, a beautiful good morning from the ASEAN countries. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to be with you today at this UK-ASEAN Business Forum entitled A Future Redefined. As the chair of the ASEAN BAC 2022, I extend my council sincerely gratitude to the UK-ASEAN Business Council and the UK government for inviting us to co-organize this important forum. I'm also pleased to note the energetic and proactive collaborations between our two councils for the past few years, for which we are most grateful. I agree with your theme that the ASEAN future is being redefined. I would go further to say that it must be redefined. In the facts of grave challenge, achievement in line that it must be redefined. In the facts of grave challenge that we confront our planet and our environment, we simply cannot afford to remain idle or passive and fragmented. Otherwise, we are putting the future of our children and future generation in harm's way. There is an old Greek proverb that says, a society grows great when old men plant trees, whom shall they know that they shall never sit in. I'm not old, but firmly believe that man and woman must plant trees now for our future generation to come. While we commend ASEAN for historic achievement in laying the foundations for establishment of the ASEAN Economic Community under the AEC Strategic Blueprint 2025, I ask the question, is it enough? By 2025, we can expect to see the ASEAN well equipped to face the gaps, the weakness that we have greatly emerged in addressing their consequences of this pandemic and the future pandemics. At the rate we are going, will the ASEAN economy become more resilient, more inclusive, and more sustainable by 2025? I'm afraid there are more questions and answers that we may have to temper our expectation. However, it is precisely in this content that I'm greatly encouraged by the government theme for its 2022 ASEAN Chairmanship, which ASEAN Act or ASEAN Addressing Challenge Together. Being together does not only refer to the ASEAN government working as one. More importantly, it calls upon us for private sectors to deepen our private-public partnership, which one is forum is all about. The call to action has been continuing battle cry for ASEAN, translating goal, declaration, framework, and strategy plan into action has been continued challenge for all of us. So if I may pose a special request to the distinguished speakers and panelists today, as we are way through the priority strategic issue on how ASEAN should ensure a green sustainable recovery, achieving digital transformation, benefit from asset and other mega trends, kindly look at how ASEAN governance structures and capacity can be strengthened to facilitate action for quick harvest and quick result. I must say that my enduring belief in faith in ASEAN to master its collective political will to seize the opportunity to succeed can and will realize. But only if ASEAN can move and act much faster and more efficient than ever before it is entirely history. I therefore hope that this year's chairmanship by Cambodian will become more defining moment for the ASEAN. I wish you all highly productive forum, and I'm looking forward to the time we may all sit together as one community under the shade of the trees we plant today. Thank you.
time, could I invite His Excellency Pan Sorosak, Minister of Commerce, Kingdom of Cambodia, and my good friend, His Excellency Dato Lim Jock Hoi, the Secretary General of ASEAN. We're going to hear a keynote from each of our guests and then take some questions. So I'd like to invite Lord Grimston to kick off. We know we've seen a UK government increasingly determined to build strong ties with Southeast Asia, which is very exciting for all of us here today. And I look forward to your remarks.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Lady Neville-Rolfe. Fellow ministers, Baroness Neville-Rolfe, Your Excellencies, Lords, Ladies and Gentlemen. Good morning to those of you here in London. Great pleasure to be at the UK-ASEAN Business Forum, and as Sharad says, great to be here in person. And of course, good afternoon to friends joining us virtually from across Asia. Particularly their Excellencies Minister Pan. Minister Pan is probably the oldest person present today. I will be leaving this forum and planting trees on my way home. Welcome also to Secretary General Dato Lim Jock Hoi. And I very much join, a bit before we start, I would very much like to echo the words of Lady Neville-Rolfe in saying our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine this morning. This forum is a fantastic opportunity to support Cambodia's priorities for its ASEAN chairmanship and to enhance our economic cooperation. And I must absolutely thank the UK-ASEAN Business Council and the ASEAN Business Advisory Council for bringing us all together. Cambodia's goal to address challenges together absolutely resonates with the UK as we commence our first full year as an ASEAN dialogue partner. The UK, of course, has worked side by side with ASEAN since its creation. And indeed, as I'm speaking, the Secretary of State for International Trade is currently in the region, meeting with businesses and governments to build even stronger bridges between our economies. And more personally, I have a house in the region. I've worked there for many years, and indeed, 3 of my grandchildren were born in ASEAN. So I've done my little bit for ASEAN-UK relationships. We should note that trade between the UK and ASEAN is already thriving. It was worth more than £35 billion in 2020, having grown 45% no less between 2010 and 2019. The UK is a leading investor in ASEAN. In 2020, FDI from the UK into the bloc totaled more than £30 billion. From cybersecurity unicorn Darktrace to fintech innovators such as Wise, British businesses, I'm pleased to say, have a strong presence across ASEAN. In Singapore alone, British companies employ more than 50,000 people. And what's more, of course, and this is where the mutuality kicks in, businesses across ASEAN are backing the UK and setting up shop in our open liberal economy. In 2020, ASEAN businesses invested more than £15 billion into our economy. And as the United Kingdom's Minister for Investment, I warmly welcome that. Thailand's Central Group have recently acquired a large stake in Selfridges, iconic department stores. And of course, Malaysian investment has transformed our landmark Battersea Power Station. And thanks to a multi-million-pound investment from Jollibee, hungry Brits can now enjoy the Filipino favorites of Chicken Joy and Jolly Spaghetti, both foods which I know well from my time having an office in Manila. Our recent free trade agreements with Singapore and Vietnam contain provisions to strengthen investment. And I think we should all very much welcome that. And we intend to work both through ASEAN and with member countries to maximize investment in the years ahead. And as the UK's Minister for Investment, I'm always very keen to work with individual member countries, with companies, from the region on their journey to invest in the UK. And I think in this, as in so many other areas, it is recognizing mutuality of interests that is so important. And I think that should be one of our themes today, as how important is mutual advantage, because that is how we make these relationships sustainable. We've identified some key sectors for enhanced cooperation. In digital, our pioneering ASEAN-UK Digital Innovation Partnership is helping countries across the bloc maximize their digital connectivity. And we are working alongside ASEAN to give our businesses improved access to information, to reform regulation, and to break new ground in key sectors like e-payments. Southeast Asia is a growing market for our banks and fintechs. It's very appropriate that we are at HSBC this morning, for this meeting. So much so that financial services accounted for more than 15% of our service exports to ASEAN in 2020. And this year, the UK will provide regulatory advice and training in the region to build on this progress and accelerate the rollout of fintech solutions. And we will additionally support net zero commitments through the rollout of renewable energy solutions, sharing our public and private sector expertise in sectors such as offshore wind and electric vehicles. Infrastructure investment will also be key to ASEAN's post-pandemic recovery. The UK stands with you in this, and we will invest over £100 million to support new long-term finance for clean infrastructure in the region. And our revamped development finance institution, British International Investment, is expanding its geographical remit to fund sustainable projects in the Indo-Pacific. So it's absolutely clear to me that ASEAN will continue to play a vital and a growing role in the Asia-Pacific in the years ahead. And of course, a region that is growing rapidly and by 2030 will be home to two-thirds of the world's middle classes. So I look forward to working with ASEAN to maximize this growth, to tighten our trade and investment ties, and to generate mutual opportunities for our businesses. And I've got no doubt that if we do this, the benefits will be felt throughout ASEAN and throughout all regions and areas of the UK. Thank you all very much.
Lord Grimston, thank you so much for getting us off on such an optimistic note. And it's great pleasure for me now to invite His Excellency Minister Pan Sorosak to deliver his keynote address on Cambodia's chairmanship of ASEAN 2022. Now, Minister Pan is the chair of the ASEAN Economic Ministers meeting at a time of very significant importance for ASEAN, as the region looks to recover from COVID and to grow sustainably. Minister, a warm welcome to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and good afternoon to you all. Warm greeting to Lord Grimstone's Minister of State for Investments at the Departments of the International Trade, Excellency Khan Parat, my good friend, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Cambodia to the United Kingdom, Excellencies, fellow ministers from ASEAN member states and the United Kingdoms, my good friend Dato Chim Lok Chok Hoi, Secretary General of ASEAN, Nia Ong Ket Meng, Chair of ASEAN Business Council for 2022. Of course, Baroness, greetings, Baroness Neville Rolfe, Chair of the UK-ASEAN Business Council. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me for delivering a keynote address and taking part in these discussions at the UK-ASEAN Business Forum 2022 under the theme A Future Redefined. On behalf of the officials of the Ministry of Commerce of Cambodia and on my own behalf, I would like to express my appreciations to the UK's Department for International Trade and the UK-ASEAN Business Council for putting great efforts in organizing this important forum with excellent arrangement despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. I believe that this forum will enable us to exchange views, pooling key policy recommendations to explore how we can emerge stronger from the pandemic. As you all know that under the theme ASEAN Act stands for addressing challenges together, Cambodia is committed to work closely with all ASEAN member states, dialogue partners, and private sectors to deepen cooperations and mutual support in order that we can achieve priorities economic deliverables for 2022. That is, restore the regional economies and advance the establishment of ASEAN economic communities. Taking these opportunities, I would like to share with you updates on Cambodia's COVID-19 vaccinations campaign as part of the nation's ongoing economic recovery efforts. As of February 20, 2022, we have vaccinated 89.97% of total Cambodia populations of 16 million, in which Cambodia has reached 102.25% of targeted adult age 18 upwards, 99.73% of targeted adolescents age 12 under 18 to under 18, 106.27% of targeted children age 9 to under 12, and 108.65% of targeted children age 5. The Cambodian government has also just launched the vaccinations campaign for children aged 3 to 5. Excellencies, we already reopened our universities, school, businesses, as well as other socio-economic activities. That is, Cambodia is open for business. Meanwhile, the Cambodian government has also launched the 4th dose or booster dose of COVID-19 vaccination campaign to fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. During these critical periods, Cambodia and other ASEAN member states stand ready to join hands with private sectors in fighting against the COVID-19 by ensuring that the cross-border trade will not get disrupted by the potential COVID-19 restrictions measures. We especially commit to keep market open for smooth, free flows of essential goods, foodstuffs, pharmaceutical products, and medical supply. Also, I strongly hope that with the utmost efforts of each ASEAN member states in speeding and scaling up the vaccinations programs and the effective implementation of ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, Cambodia will be able to fully host physically ASEAN Summit and related meetings. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted that the UK has become a new dialogue partner of ASEAN since August last year. Under Cambodia's chairmanship this year, we are endeavors to steer ASEAN collective efforts in order to promote an action-oriented approach that is based on openness, honesty, good faith, solidarity, and harmony with ASEAN to effectively address the common challenges facing our region. In this regard, Cambodia commits to work closely with ASEAN dialogue partners and the private sectors to sustain ASEAN as a region of critical importance for global trade, investment and supply chain through among others, generating maximum benefits from existing free trade agreements, and especially the regional comprehensive economic partnership, which entered into force on January 1st, 2022. The implementation of the RCEP is a significant milestone since we launched the RCEP negotiations under Cambodia ASEAN Chairmanships in 2012, that is 10 years ago. Additionally, in line with our theme, ASEAN Act, Addressing Challenges Together, the AEC Blueprints 2025 and the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Frameworks, Cambodia will give ASEAN to accelerate and harmonize ASEAN objectives in deepening regional and global integration process and building back stronger from the pandemic with inclusiveness, competitiveness, resilience, sustainability, and equitabilities through our proposed 17 possible priority economic deliverables, PEDs. Due to time constraints, I may bring up only the PEDs, which are the most important for ASEAN and the UK corporations. 1. Feasibility study on technology transfer models for projects related to Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. 2. Framework for promoting the growth of digital startups ecosystems in ASEAN. 3. Work programs to support implementations of the frameworks for circular economy for ASEAN economic community. 4th, policy toolkit for integrating provisions focused on women's entrepreneurship in ASEAN MSMEs policies. 5, ASEAN e-commerce trust mark framework. And 6, development of the ASEAN guidelines on sustainable agriculture, just to name a few. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our foreseeable priorities is to ensure more satisfactory outcomes of ASEAN efforts to emerge stronger from the COVID-19 pandemic. So, to expedite the recovery of economic growth, we commit to work closely with ASEAN and dialogue partners, as well as to actively engage with the ASEAN Business Council, including the UK's ASEAN Business Council, to include that ASEAN will remain a region of critical importance for global trade, investment, and supply chain through, among others, leveraging the existing free trade agreements to the maximums, especially the RCEPs. As I mentioned above, I hope to welcome you all to Cambodia, have face-to-face meetings in the second half of this year, so that we can discuss and intensify our cooperations on any mutually concerted benefits. Thank you for your attention. For the Q&As, I am pleased to introduce my colleagues, Peter T. He's the Secretary of State of Ministry of Commerce, to come into to answer you all the questions that you may have due to my busy schedule. I hope to see you soon. Thank you. And thank you for your attention.
Minister Pan, thank you so much. And thank you for setting out so clearly your priority economic deliverables. I think that's very, very helpful. It's also great that Cambodia is open for business. And many of us in the business community look forward to visiting Cambodia as things open up, perhaps later in the year. And we look forward to hearing from the Secretary of State during the panel. I'd now like to invite my friend, His Excellency, Dato Lim Jock Hoi, Secretary General of ASEAN, to join us. Just yesterday, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the Secretary of State at the Department for International Trade, met with Dato Lim And we were delighted to see that green infrastructure projects and digital transformation were on the agenda. And we look forward to helping with the delivery of all these plans in the coming months and years. But if I may, Your Excellency, can I give you the floor?
Thank you, Baroness Nebel-Rolfe, Chair of UK-ASEAN Business Council, His Excellency Pen Sorosak, Minister of Commerce, Kingdom of Cambodia, His Excellencies Lord Grimston, Minister for Investment of United Kingdom, and Nick Kit Ming, Chair of ASEAN Bank. A very good afternoon from Jakarta. I hope all of you are keeping well and safe wherever you are. I would like to warmly thank the UK-ASEAN Business Council for inviting me to this UK-ASEAN Business Forum 2022. I'm also glad to see the level of engagement of business community of ASEAN and UK at this event. It demonstrates the close trade and investment interests and relevance between our two economies. Firstly, I'm pleased to welcome the UK as an ASEAN dialogue partner and appreciate the UK efforts to bolster trade internationally, especially with ASEAN. In our first year as a dialogue partner, ASEAN and UK have been engaging in a comprehensive collaboration in many areas, not just in trade and investment, but also in finance, supply chain cooperation, and assistance in identifying new growth sectors like mid-tech, sustainability, digital transformation, and regulatory excellence. I had the opportunity to discuss this in detail with Her Excellency Anne Mary Trevelyan, Secretary of State for International Trade, yesterday at the ASEAN Secretariat. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of Cambodia Chairmanship of ASEAN in 2022, ASEAN Act Together or Addressing Challenges Together, is a clear reflection of the need to consolidate solidarity and addressing global and regional challenges. In this process, the role of the private sector is indispensable. Let me share my perspective on 4 key areas of priority of ASEAN, where the business community could contribute for the mutual benefit of our region. First, facilitating cross-border trade has been a long-standing priority of ASEAN economic integration. ASEAN is committed to numerous long-term trade facilitation initiatives, such as the ASEAN Single Window, ASEAN Custom Trade Transit System, the ASEAN Trade Reciprocity, which aim to harmonize standards to cut business costs and further streamlining trade procedure and minimizing non-tariff measures. In our next phase, we are working with our partners and international organizations to enhance the regulatory and infrastructure readiness of ASEAN member states to adopt digital documentation, especially the cross-border paperless trade. The UK shall be a good partner for ASEAN in joining our efforts to move towards a common direction of interoperability and trusted system of digital documentation recognition. Second, in facilitating of investment, ASEAN adopted the ASEAN Investment Facilitation Framework in 2021 to strengthen the principles and action to facilitate the inflow of investment into the region. Despite the pandemic challenges last 2 years, ASEAN remains one of the key global investment destinations after China. This has reflected in ASEAN growth that is predicted to grow around 5.1% this year and the coming years. I would like to assure the UK business community that trade and investment facilitation remains the core strategic measures to build ASEAN as a single market and production base. The ASEAN member state has been strong proponent for an open and free, as well as more liberal global trade and investment. The best example can be seen from the entry into force of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership agreements, the largest ASEAN-led FTA in the world, which have been in force for 1st January 2022. I urge the UK business community to take advantage in boosting your global supply chain network through ASEAN. Third, embracing digital transformation is the ASEAN new strategy to unleash immense power of digital technology for the regional economic growth. It is the next driver of our growth. In 2021, ASEAN adopted several major digitalization initiatives, such as the Bandar Seri Begawan Roadmap, ASEAN Digital Master Plan 2025, and the ASEAN Agreement on e-commerce to accelerate the digital technology adoption of ASEAN businesses, enhance the innovation and competitiveness, and pave the way for the negotiation of the establishment of the ASEAN digital economy by 2025. I'm also glad to see the establishment of the ASEAN-UK Digital Innovation Partnership, which demonstrates the mutual commitments of ASEAN and UK to forge stronger relationships. Fourth, reinforcing sustainability and resilience is an emerging agenda of ASEAN. Some of the major initiatives that have been recently launched in order to lay the foundation of a greater sustainable development goal and guide the region's transition to low carbon economy include ASEAN Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance and the Framework for Circular Economy for the ASEAN Economic Community. In this regard, we appreciate the UK's financial support of £110 million to the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facilities last year. Ladies and gentlemen, strengthening the private sector partnership is our top priority in the ASEAN-UK Economic Partnership. I encourage public-private collaboration between the ASEAN ABC and the ASEAN Bank and the ASEAN economic official to synergize private sector's interest in implementing the ASEAN-UK Joint Declaration on the Future Economic Cooperation and the Cambodian Chairmanship priorities. In closing, let me thank the UK-ASEAN Business Council once again for organizing this event. I look forward to further strengthening our relations through effective public-private sector collaboration and to enhance business opportunities for ASEAN and the UK. Thank you very much. I look forward to discussing the point above in the panel discussion. Thank you.
Dato Lim, thank you so much for, as usual, an inspiring and clear speech. And I now, if I may, will move on to get some questions from our audience, both digital and here. Let's see, hope it works. I think I'll take the chairman's prerogative and ask the first question. And I'd like to ask you, Minister. I've been struck that about the scale of ASEAN's digital economy and its potential. An often quoted number is that since the pandemic, there are 70 million new digital consumers across ASEAN that have come online. How do you think the UK and ASEAN can work together on this digital potential?
I mean, that's a great question. And of course, look, the pandemic was the worst thing that's happened to the world during my lifetime. But in terms of something came out of it that is positive, I think it is the hugely increased interest in digital in all its forms. obviously in communication. We see the reality of this in this morning's meeting, but absolutely critically in promoting trade. I mean, if you think of it, the fact that traditionally goods move following trails of paper as they cross boundaries, different bits of paper being used for this boundary, that boundary, that boundary, it makes e-trade, e-commerce such a positive thing from everybody. It benefits the businesses, it benefits the consumers most of all. And I think it is e-trade and e-commerce that is really going to bring the advantages of trade home to many billions of people throughout the world.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the point that was made about trade facilitation and the importance of digital and trade facilitation actually was a point that I picked up from the discussions. I hope this will work. I'm hoping that Julianne Lee from Standard Chartered Bank is able to ask a question. Let's see if the system's obviously not working. So Philip, could you ask? You've got a question, I think. Philip Bouveret of JCB and a board member of the UK-ASEAN Business Council. In fact, he persuaded me to take on the job.
Secretary General, Dato Lim Jokhoi, welcome to London virtually, and I'm sure we'll see each other face to face in due course. My question is, we would like your thoughts, or I certainly would like thoughts, on how the digital transformation, which has just been part answered by Lord Grimstone with a question from Baroness de Rolf, but digital transformation, sustainable development, and in particular, sustainable infrastructure development, and how the UK can help and cooperate with the ASEAN region. Thank you.
Dato Lim.
Can you repeat the question? I cannot hear the question from the panel.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Dato Lim, can you hear the question now?
No, can Alan Lai repeat the question to Dato Lim? Otherwise, we'll have to take quick.
Yeah, what's the question about? I cannot hear from here. Is that about digital?
The question, Dato, is what are your thoughts in the next phase of community building, which prioritizes digital transformation and sustainable development? And in particular, your thoughts on sustainable infrastructure, please, Dato.
Okay. Okay. I know that sustainable development a key important area for ASEAN, I think. ASEAN is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world, and climate change, I think, which is a test to our limits from a member state resilience and exacerbate the development gap in the region. We recognize the urgency of taking action on climate change. ASEAN has issued a joint statement on climate change, COP26, which articulates the common views of climate change and the result to achieve the ASEAN community resilient to climate change. And we has published the ASEAN State of Climate Change report, which outlined a viable pathway towards 2050 and net zero transition target. ASEAN is currently also developing the ASEAN climate finance strategy to enhance access to climate finance and investment. This will be very important in closing the bankability gap for sustainable finance. ASEAN will also establish the ASEAN Center for Climate Change as a regional center of excellence for generating analysis and innovative solution to address the ASEAN climate change challenges. This initiative will be built on relevant ASEAN strategic partnerships and documents that will be adopted 2021, including framework for circular economy for the ASEAN Economic Community, the ASEAN Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance, and the ASEAN Declaration on Blue Economy, among others. And this occasion, I would like to invite the private sector through the ASEAN UK Business Council to put the above initiative into concrete investment in sustainability sector and technology. I think there are three pathways to ensure both ASEAN and UK can benefit from this development. First, we need a steep increase in investment in energy sector, which including decarbonization of existing assets as well as all renewable, in carbon sink as well as nature-based solution and green transport, including electric vehicles and battery. Second, ASEAN and UK could implement market-based solution as stipulated in Paris Agreement, especially as the relevant rule book and has finalized the COP26 in Glasgow. And finally, third one, ASEAN and UK could also pursue a non-market approach. This includes investment in energy efficient build and transportation infrastructure, circular economy solution, sustainable agriculture practices, and support for the shift from resource-intensive livelihood to climate-resilient occupation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dato Lim. I'd now like to take a question from the room, and I think Ambassador of Vietnam is keen to ask a question. And perhaps, Alan, you could, after that, bring in a question from the online community, given we've got these troubles. We haven't got much time. Ambassador.
Very quick question to Minister Grimstone, who I have a very honored to meet with and see a real leadership in this new phase of development. I think I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on a strong message and concrete measures that the government of the UK is delivering to have a strong economic trade investment cooperation with ASEAN, particularly maybe with some country like Vietnam, and some of the difference between before Brexit and post-Brexit. Thank you.
I mean, thank you very much for that, Ambassador. And I always enjoy our interactions. You do a great service for your country, you know, in London. I have a deep personal conviction that trade and investment are the best economic levers all countries have to boost economic growth. Because it is through trade and investment that we generate economic activity, that we generate intellectual property, that we generate mutual advantage. And in our new freedoms as a global trading nation in our own right, I think everybody will have seen in the room, and hopefully pleased by this, the extent to which we've been able to push forward our independent trade policy. Now, to give an example, the comprehensive Trans-Pacific Partnership, where we're applying for accession, those talks have gone exceedingly well. We've now got to the one of the most crucial parts of the talks, and there was the concluding part, which is the market access part of the talks. We're all very confident that strong agreement is going to be reached on that. And who would have imagined that the United Kingdom and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, in as little as 12 months, 18 months, would have been able to enter into a trade agreement of that sort. So there's plenty more to come. I love the fact that nowadays, free trade agreements cover such a wide range of activities. Of course, they cover trade, but they cover investment, they cover digitalization, and they cover help for small and medium enterprises. They encourage the empowerment of women. And I think it is through these agreements that countries such as yours and mine, are going to really be able to confirm and develop their bilateral relationships.
Thank you, Minister. Alan, is there any final question for Lord Grimstone? And then I'll just ask the other two ministers to make any final remarks, and we'll take questions at the later session. Alan?
We do have a question, Baroness Navarro, for the panel, which is about supply chains in ASEAN and with relation to RCEP. And Hanvu is asking, 2022 is expected to bring about big opportunities for ASEAN with the implementation of RCEP. But with COVID restrictions having not been fully lifted, how can we regain and build up the strength of regional supply chains?
Lord Grimstone.
Well, look, I think it all became, very obvious to us during the pandemic that, prior to that, we thought globalization was a magic force, which would allow, any good that you wanted to arrive from anywhere in the world at any time that you wanted. And I'm afraid that the whistle was blown on that during the pandemic. And I think that all nations have realized that understanding supply chains, and frankly, the other big surprise was how little knowledge even our largest companies have of their supply chains once they went down below their tier one suppliers. And I think it's taught everybody a lesson about resilience, having diversity of supply, understanding who your suppliers are, encouraging your suppliers. And I think that, ASEAN and the UK are really well placed together to try to be leaders in developing diverse supply chains.
Secretary of State, a final comment from you, please, and then from Dato Lim, Secretary of State.
I think supply chain is critical, and for a predictable production of goods and services. And that's the reason why in ASEAN, we work closely with ASEAN member states to have MOU on supply chain, especially for essential goods and services. And we would like to work closely with UK in this particular area of cooperation. And the other thing is important is how we can utilize digital technology as part of our development in making sure the supply chain is credible and is able to perform its measures so that we can increase our production in our industry. The digital technology is critical, especially in ASEAN member states, as we embark on the 4IR and sustainable development and utilization of e-commerce. These are very important elements that we see, and we realize that ASEAN will have immense advantage by having these tools to increase our economic growth, which is estimated around 5.5% next year. And our e-commerce is expanded to 400 billion by 2025. And this has provided greater opportunity to all of us with a growing young and urban population, and I wish to emphasize that ASEAN has a great deal of opportunity to harness digital transformation for growth. Meanwhile, I think the UK remains one of the leading digital economies in the world with an annual revenue of 150 billion and 1.5 million employees in the digital sector. I think we can work together to improve our region and to create an opportunity for both ASEAN and UK. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I think it remains now for me to thank the panel. Time is up and we have to move over to the next session, which is online. So thank you so much, Lord Grimstone, for coming back to your old ground of the business community. And we are so grateful to have somebody like you actually within the government. It gives us a lot of confidence, and especially on trade for Southeast Asia. I'd like to thank the Secretary General, His Excellency Dato Lim. Look forward to seeing him in the not too distant future. To thank His Excellency Pan Sorosak, and to thank his Secretary of State for joining us for the last few minutes. And I very much look forward to meeting him and moving things forward together during Cambodia's leadership of ASEAN. And I'd now like to hand over, I hope the system works, to Sam Myers, Her Majesty's Deputy Trade Commissioner in Singapore. So we move online, but the fun continues.
Thank you very much, Baroness Neville-Rolfe, and what a fantastic first session. So a lot to live up to for this second one now. Ministers, Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, welcome to the second session of this year's UK-ASEAN Business Forum. And we've got the theme today of UK-ASEAN trade and investment. Many of you will know that this year is a really significant one for Southeast Asia, as for the first time, ASEAN will host the G20, APEC, and ASEAN summits simultaneously. This hat trick of globally impactful events represents a really unique opportunity for the region to champion free and fair trade and to influence the rules-based international trading system. It also presents a really great opportunity for us to further deepen the UK-ASEAN trade relationship and in line with the theme of today's event, to redefine our future. Prior to the pandemic, UK and ASEAN was on an upward trajectory in terms of our trade, which grew 45% between 2010 and 2019. It was hit by the global headwinds of 2020 and 21, and we know there is room to do more. That's why the UK has pursued this deeper relationship with ASEAN, which Dato Lim Jock Hoi reflected in terms of our ASEAN Dialogue Partner status, where the UK was the first new dialogue partner in 25 years. The UK already has free trade agreements in place with Singapore, Vietnam, agreement in principle for a digital economy agreement with Singapore. And as the Minister, Lord Grimstone, updated us, we're making really good progress on accession to the mega trade deal, CPTPP. In terms of our bilateral relationships, we're also in a really exciting phase there. Just 2 weeks ago, we had a productive economic dialogue with our friends from the Philippines, agreeing how to deepen the bilateral relationship and also recognising their important role as the UK's economic coordinating country under ASEAN. And we've also heard Secretary of State Anne-Marie Trevelyan has recently been in Jakarta meeting the ASEAN Secretary General. She arrives into Singapore tomorrow to continue deepening the relationships. So a lot's going on, but this session is about exploring how we can use these existing relationships and platforms to further boost trade and investment. So what are the key trends and opportunities across ASEAN that we need to take account of? What impact will RCEP have on multilateral trade? Specifically, what role can UK businesses and ASEAN businesses play in terms of recovering from the pandemic and recovering our trade and investment? And perhaps getting on to the bigger topic, what does globalization mean in 2022 with everything that's going on? So to kick off that very big and sort of grand set of questions, I'm delighted we've got a really esteemed keynote speaker, Assistant Secretary Alan Gepti from the Bureau of International Trade Relations at the Department of Trade and Industry for the Philippines. Alan's portfolio covers international trade policy and trade negotiations at the bilateral, regional and multilateral level. And he served as the country's lead negotiator in the historic RCEP agreement. So we're in good hands to set the scene and set the stage for today's session. And I'd like to add my personal thanks, Alan, for the support and the personal investment that you've made in welcoming the UK to ASEAN and volunteering to be the UK's economic coordinating country for ASEAN. So it's really a pleasure to have you here to kick off this session. And ASEC Gepti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sam, for that introduction. On behalf of our Secretary, Ramon M. Lopez, I am here to deliver our keynote address on this very important forum. A very good day once again to all distinguished speakers, participants, and guests. First, allow me to thank the UK-ASEAN Business Council and the ASEAN Business Advisory Council for organizing this forum. I am honored to take part in this important event that brings together key figures in ASEAN-UK relations to talk about trade and investment opportunities and the prospects of ASEAN-UK economic relations. Let me also congratulate the UK for having been formally accorded the ASEAN Dialogue Partner status last year. The Philippines eagerly anticipates taking on the role of country coordinator for ASEAN-UK economic relations. We are ready to extend our assistance and work closely with the UK and ASEAN member states to ensure a robust and mutually beneficial economic partnership. The Philippines places great importance to our engagement with the UK, both at the bilateral and regional level, being one of our top trading and investment partners. At the bilateral front, we have strengthened our engagement with the UK, including through the PH-UK Economic Dialogue, in which we recognize that there is a huge opportunity for growth in trade with the level of consumer demand from respective markets and the supply chains that can be developed from complementary industries such as aerospace, automotive, electric vehicles, electronics, and pharmaceuticals. This is also reinforced by the preferential treatment for Philippine products under the UK Enhanced Framework. To facilitate the GSP Plus monitoring, the Philippine government has always submitted requirements showing the country's compliance with the 27 international core conventions on human rights, labor, environment, and good governance. The GSP Plus preferences have continued to benefit particularly the marginalized sectors in our country. The fisher folk, farmers, micro, small, and medium enterprises, and the workers in the value chain of the exporters, precisely fulfilling the objectives of the GSP Plus, which is to help address poverty and inequality. On investments, it is very timely that key government reforms and initiatives to improve the business environment in the Philippines have been enacted recently, which further position the Philippines as an ideal investment destination, especially in manufacturing for products to access the UK market as well as the rest of the European Union. Some of the new amendments we have introduced include the easing of foreign equity restrictions and attracting more global players that will modernize several sectors such as in telecommunications, shipping, air carriers, railways, and subways. Recently, the Congress and the Senate approved the amendment on the Public Service Act, and that will ease foreign equity restrictions in key sectors from a maximum of 40% to 100% foreign equity. Similarly, the amended Retail Trade Liberalization Act and the Foreign Investment Act are expected to establish reforms to remove barriers for entry for foreigners. Soon, there will be lower capital requirement for foreign investors in retail trade. From a previous investment requirement of $2.5 million, now it is down to $500,000. For multiple branches, the minimum investment per store is now down to $200,000. In view of this, the Philippines can also be a second home for UK startup firms with respect to the Foreign Investment Act, where startup firms involved in advanced technology with a minimum capital requirement of only $100,000 that's coming from $200,000 and now can even entertain 15 employees from the local workforce. Furthermore, we have adopted the CREATE Act, where we hope to attract higher levels of technology, investment, industry sectors, electronics, aerospace, automotive, and the like. We shall be giving more favorable terms and incentives, such as longer income tax holidays for industries with high technology, where we try to entice more FDIs in the particular field. We have the British Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines to thank for their continued support in actively pushing for these reforms, including the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreements, which we are hopeful will soon be concurred by the Senate. Beyond figures, the nature and quality of investments from the UK and the business partnerships being formed have helped move the Philippines up the value chain in innovation-based manufacturing and high-value technology-based services. There is also strong potential for the Philippines to enhance digital skills training and education, accelerate digital adoption and innovation, and promote digital trade opportunities for our businesses, including micro, small, and medium enterprises. Even at the multilateral level, the Philippines actively engages in e-commerce discussions. The phenomenal rise of e-commerce in the Philippines during the pandemic cannot be ignored. The Philippines is now the fastest growing internet economy in Southeast Asia. According to the Economy Southeast Asia report from Google, Temasek, and Bain & Company, the Southeast Asian internet economies are showing double-digit growth, with the Philippines in the lead at 93% growth rate from 2020 to 2021. The forecast growth of transactions for the Philippines is from $9 billion to $17 billion, reaching $40 billion by 2025. We have also yielded 12 million new e-commerce users during the pandemic, the highest proportion of new users in the region. At the regional front, we also see this same trend in our engagement with the UK under ASEAN. Even prior to being an official ASEAN dialogue partner, the UK has been supporting ASEAN through a number of initiatives in the areas of digital innovation, financial services, supply chain resilience, and sustainable growth. For 2022 and beyond, ASEAN-UK Economic Partnership will be guided by the Joint Ministerial Declaration as adopted by the ASEAN Economic Ministers and UK Secretary of State for International Trade last year. The said areas of mutual interest are emphasized in the Joint Ministerial Declaration. Thus, we are confident that we will keep our momentum moving forward. Given the UK's advantage, particularly on innovation and the use of digital technology across industry sectors, ASEAN and UK can expand collaboration in these areas to set a solid foundation of our partnership. Similarly, ASEAN's efforts on regional integration and COVID-19 response have increased its role in the global stage. Moreover, the entry into force of RCEP and the review of existing agreements in the pipeline demonstrates ASEAN's push to maintain an open, free, and fair trade. With the participation of ASEAN members in mega trade deals such as RCEP and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, ASEAN is well positioned to accelerate intra-regional trade and growth. I wish also to highlight that ASEAN's well-established supply chains in the region also presents an opportunity for the UK to access the big market of ASEAN, as well as ASEAN's FTA partners. This can be further complemented by the forthcoming implementation of the RCEP agreement and the UK's accession to the CPTPP. There is a wide range of areas of cooperation, and we see the great potential that closer economic relations will bring. Rest assured that we will work closely with the UK to ensure that the objectives we have set to deepen regional and bilateral relations are concretized and that our trade relations prosper. Lastly, in all these initiatives and priorities, one important element that we have to always keep in mind is human resource development. We have to continue investing in our people, in skills that would define not only the future, but skills that would uplift the well-being of future generations. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I look forward to our discussions today.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary, for those really insightful remarks. You really framed the stage for the conversation to come. I'm told that you need to leave us now, but thank you for setting that scene so eloquently for us moving forward. So we're now going to move on to the panel discussion, and we have four fantastic panelists joining us today. Let me introduce them very briefly. Firstly, Her Excellency Tan Sri Dr. Rebecca Fatima Star Maria, Executive Director for APEC Secretariat. Dr. Rebecca advises and supports APEC's 21 member economies, was previously the trading negotiator for Malaysia, and has overseen the formulation of Malaysian policy and positions on many major trade agreements, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Next up, we've got His Excellency Dr. Huot Pum, Under Secretary of State at the Ministry of Economy and Finance for the Kingdom of Cambodia. Dr. Huot previously spent 7 years working for the ASEAN +3 Macroeconomic Research Office, better known as AMRO. We're also lucky to have Bapak Arshad Rashid, Chairman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or KADIN. Pak Arshad is also the President Director of one of Indonesia's leading diversified energy companies and is actively supporting multiple social impact and social enterprise efforts across Indonesia. And finally, last but not least, we have Warwick Klein, Chairman and CEO for KPMG Cambodia and Vietnam. Warwick has been a tax advisor in Vietnam for over 20 years and is recognised as one of the country's leading tax professionals. So thank you for joining me here today, esteemed panel. We're all virtual, but we'll do our best to connect into the room in London that I'm sure many of us wish we were in at the moment. I'd like to start by inviting your opening reflections and share your opening remarks. So please can I begin with you, Dr. Rebecca?
Thank you very much, Sam. It's an honor to be here representing the APEC Secretariat. I know in my previous life, I did a lot of work with ASEAN and have a real fondness for ASEAN. I track it very religiously. I was part of the body that formulated or gave birth to RCEP. We sat around the table trying to figure out what to do with the ASEAN +3 and the ASEAN +6. There was all these conversations going, and we decided finally to get down to ASEAN needed to take the reins. And what was the objective? The objective was trade facilitation. We wanted to make it easier to do business. We had all these trade agreements, this ASEAN Plus trade agreements, with each with a different set of rules. So, and we decided, no, we needed to make it easy for businesses. Otherwise, you know, each time you do business with a different country, you have a different set of rules. So that was the overarching rationale, as well, you know, for how we thought about RCEP. So I'm so pleased that it's finally come into force. I know there's some members who haven't signed on, but it's done. And I'm very, very happy for that. Likewise, the CPTPP, it was an uphill journey for us in Malaysia when it was the TPP, negotiating the TPP, getting the buy-in. You know, in all these agreements, at the end of the day, I'm sure our friend from KADIN will say this, at the end of the day, it is not so much negotiating with your partner as with your domestic constituents. That is the challenge. And now, you know, in the later part of the session, when we go deeper into these agreements, we are looking to move beyond the traditional trade agreements, to look beyond that and to bring in the element of the digital economy. And COVID has really made it an imperative. We cannot talk about trade agreements. We cannot talk about regional economic integration without talking about the digital economy. So I leave it at that, and we can have further conversations on this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rebecca. We'll definitely come back to explore some of those multilateral deals in the conversation. Next, please, can I invite Dr. Huot to provide some framing comments?
Good afternoon from Cambodia, and good morning to all friends and colleagues in London. So it is my great pleasure to be invited to take part of the UK-ASEAN Business Forum 2022. And also a great pleasure to be part of the, a panelist at that one. What I want to speak about at the moment is how we can benefit, from the global trade system that we are part of it. And then each country in the region, as well as for Cambodia, we try to be part of that. We know that there are some challenges to be ahead of us, but at the same time, we also see a lot of opportunity. And I think all of us agree that digitalization is kind of an efficient tool that helps us to stay connected. And then despite the pandemics that we remain connected, and then we try to discuss together. I can talk, from the perspective that we see, how the global trade, how the, global investment can help to shape our economic growth, as well as to make sure that we can have a share the bright futures, from the growth, especially driven by trade and investment. As a small country, open and small country like Cambodia, it is very hard to engage into the global platform if we talk about the trade or investment, but it is really important for us to be part of that. So we know that a lot of things that we need to do, especially how to do our homework in order to be part of that and not to be left behind, from the platform we have. So one thing that I can see the benefit from that is when we go we engage with the international platform as a global platform, and then at the same time, a good opportunity for us to build the bilateral. So, some partner, for example, in our ASEP, we have some ASEAN members as part of the ASEP, but at the same time, we also have the new members. And these new members, when we engage with the global platform, can help us to have the opportunity. How can we build up some bilateral, to boost our trade or investment from that one? So this is very important. And then this is how we can see, beside what we have. And now we have the forum with the UK and ASEAN. And we also think about, because when we look around, we don't see, a UK as part of the trading partner, in some global trading, the free trade agreement that we have. So why not UK, can be part of, any free trading agreement going futures, bilaterally or multilaterally. This is a great opportunity. And then just as in the previous session mentioned, about a lot of opportunity, a lot of business opportunity, a lot of things that we can work together to make sure that both regions, especially the ASEAN region and the UK, can benefit from each other, from the strong relationship in P2P, B2B, and then together with the technology, with the digitalization that can help us to stay connected. So a lot of things we can go on despite the pandemics. So I can see trade and investment and the platform that we have on a global level can help us to stay connected and to benefit, mutually from one another. So I would like to stop at the moment, at this point.
Thank you very much, Dr. White. Lots to unpack later on in the conversation. Pak Arsha, can I invite you to share some introductory comments?
Hi, thank you, Sam. And I'd like to greet Dr. Rebecca, and I'd like to greet Dr. Bhatt, and also Warwick, and everyone in London, and also and a very good afternoon from Jakarta, or good morning in London. First, it's an honor for me to be here. And I would like to start with perhaps for Indonesia or for ASEAN. There'll be a great honor for ASEAN and also Indonesia that Indonesia become the presidency of G20. And basically in November this year, the G20 meetings will be held in Bali. And I think this is a great opportunity, I was listening before this discussion in regards that, with the following event of G20 and also the ASEAN, and also next year there'll be more. So I think the G20 is something, an event that actually ASEAN should take this very much as an opportunity to actually introduce to the world what ASEAN can do for the world. And basically, the G20 presidency theme is recover together and recover stronger. And this is the theme that we would like to see that, as ASEAN, we can bring the world to look at us, to look at what we can do together to actually recover and become stronger. And with this pandemic situation, I think all of us are facing what we call a new world, a new reality, a new normal, in which what we can see the acceleration of technology. For example, today we are doing a webinar internationally using Zooms. and everyone now is zooming and zooming and zooming, you know. So it is something, there's a change in this world. So we are now anticipating what are the next thing. And digitalization is something that, you know, or Industrial Revolution 4.0, it's something that is necessary. It is becoming alive. It is part of our life. It's going what we can actually move forward. And what most important is that digitalization, in our opinion, can actually bring more the market together. Because now someone in Yogyakarta, for example, making batik, can be selling that batik not only in one city, but selling in Indonesia, selling in ASEAN, selling in the whole world. The world has changed. Market has brought digital, has brought the market to a different way. And in this one, what we need to do, for example, in ASEAN itself is, I think just now Dr. Rebecca mentioned about how can we educate domestically. It is more challenging rather than how can we actually be able to have an agreement among us in ASEAN countries. But I do believe that all of us have the same belief that we have a great market. We have a big ASEAN, you know, we are contributing to maybe 300 more population in the world, and in which that it is a big market. But at the same time, we don't want to be just a market. We want to be part of this digital transformation. We want to be part of this industry. And with this, that's why what we are bringing in the G20 agenda for Indonesia, 3 important things. Number 1 is the global health architectures. This is something that we want to have a discussion, how to create a democratization of the health. Because at the end of the day, if we don't take care of this health issue, we will not see economic growth, because everybody will still have the risk. So whatever it is, we still have to fix first our health architectures, or how can we actually do a solution on health. And of course, secondly is on digital transformation, in which on this, it is something that we need to see, because the challenge is we are moving very fast. The question is, are we ready as people, as cultures, as the values of the people? Because there's a lot of changes that's happening, but there is a need for digital transformation. But digital transformation, another challenge that we need to actually think about when we call Industrial Revolution 4.0 is whether, is this Industrial Revolution, or it could be a social revolution? This is a big question. Why I can say it's a social revolution? Because if you are not ready, this technology will change, reduce the number of jobs, and change skills. And this is something as countries in ASEAN, we all have also to be ready, to be able to see what we can do to prepare ourselves on this revolution that is ongoing. Third is also on the sustainability, of course, and energy transition particularly. Yeah. On this part, this is something that we would like to bring the agenda to the discussion of the G20, of course, on ASEAN. But how can ASEAN work together? That's the most important. How can we work together to actually, I can say, opportunities is there, but the same challenges that is still that we need to prepare ourselves. So perhaps I would like to start with that, to set the tone of what the agenda is. But another thing is that what Indonesia wants to bring, because Indonesia is the first presidency from emerging country, and this is important that we want to bring also the agenda of the emerging country, especially the involvement of SMEs. I think that is very important. And so perhaps, Sam, that's where I stop first, and to at least start off this discussion. To you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Arshad. A lot to sort of unpack there, and you've really brought out the theme of sort of digitalization. I think I sort of understand what you're saying about both opportunity and challenge and needing responses. Last but not least, Warwick, let's go over to Vietnam. I think, you know, we're dotting around the region. It's great to have such a diverse panel. So Warwick, let's hear your sort of introductory comments on these topics.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sam. And yeah, greetings everybody from Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon. It's great to see you all, and such a great turnout there in London. I wish I was there with you all. Look, I'll just make a few comments because I know we want to get into a good discussion. I feel that we all learned something during the last couple of years, the COVID situation in Southeast Asia, and primarily we learned just how resilient our economies are in this part of the world, and our people are in this part of the world as well. So we are coming out of the COVID situation in Southeast Asia in pretty good shape. And, you know, we've seen throughout strong capital flows into the region and across the region, and FDI, strong FDI numbers, strong M&A activity, strong trade numbers as well. Exports from Southeast Asia to the rest of the world have been really strong. So we ought to feel pretty good about the situation as we're coming out of COVID. And to the point that Baroness Neville-Rolfe made, and I think Ian Gibbons as well, that we're at a point in time as we hold this event that we are turning the corner on it. And we ought to be also feeling really optimistic as we look forward. And I think there's a number of things driving that. One is a lot of the things that we've talked about today, the sort of getting RCEP into action and the various trade agreements biting and taking effect, the emergence of digitization, or the acceleration of digitization across the economies of Southeast Asia, and thanks to COVID, and the enormous opportunities that that creates as well. We're at the point where borders across our region are really starting to open. Business travel is becoming possible again. I last month was really fortunate for the first time in 2 years to leave Vietnam and to visit Thailand and Cambodia, and both places, you know, I recognise just how optimistic and sunny the people on the streets were when they look out and see what's ahead of them. And I think that's a really positive thing. And I think also, to Lord Grimstone's point earlier, the business world is re-looking at supply chains, and you know, this has forced a re-examination of the globalization project, and this creates real opportunities for this part of the world. And I think everybody is looking at the way they buy, how they buy, what they do in terms of trade. And you know, while there are downside risks for Southeast Asia in that re-examination, I think, and if I echo back the sort of conversations I have with clients, I think the upside is much greater for those supply chain re-examinations. So yeah, resilience and optimism ought to be how we're heading into this conversation. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Warwick. That's a really nice sort of upbeat way, and I hope we can keep some of that upbeat energy whilst also talking about some of the challenges that we face. So look, the floor is now open. You can put your questions into the chat function if you're online. Many of us, myself included, wish we were in London with colleagues in person. And if you've got a question in London, please could you just raise your physical hand, and we'll try and get a microphone over to you. And if we can make it work, we'll have you ask the question, and I can always repeat or we'll make that work. So please do think about what questions you want to put to this esteemed panel. I'm really delighted Assistant Secretary Alan Gepti has managed to stay with us on the panel. So we've got an extra bonus member, so sort of able to ask questions and understand the sort of Philippines perspective on a lot of these issues. If I can start off with Chair's privilege and ask the first question. So we've spoken about some of the mega deals, RCEP, CPTPP, the frontier deals in terms of digital economy agreements. I'd be really keen to hear the panel's perspective on how this is changing the shape of trade, how this is changing the nature of supply chains. And Dr. Rebecca, given sort of your experience on multilateral trade agreements, where do you see the sort of next few years evolving, and perhaps trying to bring out some of the opportunities that audience members might want to be thinking about? Dr. Rebecca.
Oh, I forgot I was on mute. Thanks again.
We've got you. We've got you.
Yeah. No, I think there are a couple of things that are evolving from an APEC perspective. APEC, as you know, has 21 member economies. Some of the members are from ASEAN. Seven ASEAN members are in APEC. So as you said earlier, this is a really good year for ASEAN. You've got Indonesia hosting G20, Cambodia hosting ASEAN, and Thailand hosting APEC. So very important year for us. And if you look at us, all three host economies, there is this clear direction about recovery, about connecting, about balance. And that balance comes from the one of the key parts of the next, what we call the next generation trade and investment issues, and that is sustainability, environment, sustainability, human rights, labor rights, all those. So today, when we talk of trade agreements, it's not just trade and investment in isolation or about market access. I think we've gone past market access. I know I heard this, the earlier session talking about the final stages of your negotiations to accede to CPTPP being market access. For us, market access is taken for granted. It is part of the deal. It is now the new issues that we must deal with, the next generation issues. And these are equally important if you're talking of supply chains. You know, if you're talking about supply chains today and you do not talk of labor rights, the trade agreement, all the market access that you can negotiate will come to naught if that is not taken on board. So that's for trade agreements. And now you add on top of that the digital economy, and that adds another layer of complexity to our trade agreements, because as you have with the trade DIPA, the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, as well as the Digital Economy Agreement, which Singapore has with Australia, that sets a stage for another set of integration of rules and disciplines, which some of us are on board and ready, but there's a lot to do, a lot more to do. And going down that route would really mean stepping up our human resource development, our skills development for IT. You've got to look at the whole chain very holistically. Education, you know, how do you prepare social safety nets for, as Pak Kadin, sorry, Pak Kadin. So apart from Kadin said, you know, that, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. You know, this is what happens when you do things from home. You get people calling in. So as I said, you know, those are additional complexities that we have to deal with now when we're looking at trade agreements. Trade agreements are no more the traditional trade agreement. You cannot go into an agreement without talking of environment, sustainability, the digital economy, whether it's e-commerce, skills, all these aspects. So the key aspects that must be included. Trade facilitation has to be there. Structural reform for us as we negotiate agreements. Yes, that's all well and good, but simultaneously in our own economies, in our own countries, we must look at structural reform that would then enable us to take advantage of all the things that you've negotiated, of all the facilities that you've negotiated for business. If the trade agreement is done in isolation from the other domestic reforms, whether it's in the services area, investment areas, I'm happy to hear what Philippines has just talked about. The Assistant Secretary has talked about the improvements they're making to their investment laws, their trade laws. All those have to be done in concert. Otherwise, those trade agreements are just good enough to be framed on and put onto the wall. You know, it's that. So again, going forward, we have to rethink our trade agreements, include the element of the digital economy and the next generation trade and investment issues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rebecca. Lots to pick out there, and I like your recovery, connectivity, and balance themes there. Perhaps Dr. Huot, as Cambodia is chair of ASEAN this year, how does it look to you in terms of the global architecture for trade, the sort of the impacts of RCEP and other trade deals, and perhaps the sort of opportunities that you see coming from that? Dr. Huot.
Okay, thank you so much. So at the chair of ASEAN, I think all of you maybe have know that we have chosen the theme, the ASEAN ATC, addressing challenges together. So when we have the challenge like global challenges, the pandemic, whatever, we address together, and then we try to maintain the spirit of togetherness to work together. So what we can see, from the trade agreement that I just highlighted earlier, that a lot of benefit we can see. But at the same time, when we have the pandemics that occurs and cause us a lot of problem. So what we can see is that try at the same time to recover together from the pandemics. And then on the other side, try to benefit or engage to the global trade system. That you can see even during the pandemic, our free trade agreement, the free trade agreement with China, a free trade agreement with Korea, free trade agreement with, the RCEP one have come into force. So we don't want to delay. And the reason that for not delaying any effect come to effective of this trade agreement because of the technology, because of the digitalization that can help us to come together. Please allow me to see, from what we prepare from Cambodian perspective first, and then from the ASEAN perspective. From the Cambodian perspective, we see the opportunity, but as Dr. Rebecca has mentioned, a lot of things have to do, to prepare our homework, especially how to continue our structural reform. The thing that we can see that those are the barrier for us to engage with the mutual benefit of the international platform. We need to prepare ourselves. For instance, from Cambodian side, we try to revise, do the kind of amendment of investment law. So now we have adopted the new investment law, which provide us like more clear direction, and then with the smart incentive. So the government define the sector or subsector which are very strategic and vital for the economic growth, because we have learned, I mentioned like everything linked to the pandemics. We have learned from the pandemic that some sectors who are the key driver of economic growth have been hit hard. And then this dampens our economic growth to the negative territory. And then we try to rebound it back in 2021 and 2022 in the positive territory. And we expect more from 2024. Our economic growth will be at the level of the pre-pandemic time, around 7% and above. So we try to keep around 7% going forward from 2024. So this is one of the try to provide a good enabling investment environment to attract more FDI, because like very clean also mentioned that the trade continue to grow, investment continue to grow, so capital flow continue to grow. So because of the structural reform within the country. Beside the investment law, Cambodian government also try to design the new policy. We can capture the new opportunity, because from what we have done, I can take this opportunity to share a little bit, what we have done in terms of our economic recovery framework for the period 21-23. So we have three main pillars. The first one is the recovery. So we fix the subsector hit by the pandemics, and then we try to see the opportunity of the new growth driver. Can be the existing one or can be the new one that can play a role as the new driver for the growth. The second one is the second pillar is the reform, and the reform we try to tackle to remove all the barrier to any sector subsector that can help us to engage more with our trading partner, that we have more enabling environment that you can come in and invest. And then at the same time, we also continue with our structural reform, because the structural reform is something that we cannot have the overnight outcome, but this continue to help us to go forward in the medium and longer term. And then the third pillar, we talk about the resilience, is whether we are ready or not. I think we also mentioned whether we are ready, whether we can stay stronger or can stay resilient, to any external shock or to any new pandemic. We don't know what happened. And then at the same time, we try to prepare some supporting, tool or the platform to help us to stay resilient. For instance, we need to adapt ourselves to the climate change. We need to think about the green growth in the future. And then at the same time, we try to improve our health system. We mentioned about the health system. I think Dr. Rachid has mentioned about the health architecture. So for us, the health system, and then the skill development that we need. So all these kind of things can help us to tackle the immediate problem, and then to move forward to the future. That way we can stay resilient. This is from Cambodian perspective.
And then from the ASEAN perspective, we, as you know, that we are the host of the ASEAN 2022. So there are many things to prepare, and then we try to coordinate. And then despite some issues, some problem, but we need to come together, address the issue together and move forward. Whether the ASEAN, beside the free trade agreement that we have together, beside the ASEAN economic community that we have built up together, is there any other thing that we can engage together and move forward together? And then beside the ASEAN, how we can engage with the outsider, especially like today, how much we can engage with the UK, how much UK can benefit, how much ASEAN can benefit from the UK. So you are leading in digitalization, the digital economy. So is there anything that you can assist us? So how much we can learn from you, how much you can benefit from your engagement with us. So all these kind of things that we come together. So in short, from the ASEAN perspective, we address the issue together. The targetedness is our spirit. And at the same time, how to share the bright future together within ASEAN, as well as with our trading partner beside the ASEAN. So that's very important for us to see. And as I mentioned earlier, we learn a lot, from our engagement within the ASEAN. We learn a lot from our multilateralism, mechanism across the world. So these can help us to build up ourselves, to upgrade our communication, thanks to the technology, thanks to the digitalization, and then try to, continue our reform within the country. What kind of thing we do? A lot of things we learn, and then we try to.
I'm so sorry. I do need to ask to wrap this up so we can move on. But would you like to close your remarks?
Okay. So this can help us to move forward, and then we know what to do. From our engagement. That is what I want to say. Thank you.
No, really insightful. Thank you so much for sharing that. You also touched on energy, green energy, renewables. I just wanted to bring in a comment that we've got online from Phoebe Nonis, who points out the importance of energy efficiency alongside measures on renewables. So thank you very much for that comment, Phoebe. I'm also told that we've got some questions in London that I want to get onto the table. So Ian Gibbons and Martin Barrow, could you both ask your questions in succession, and then we'll put them back into the other panel members.
Thank you, Sam. My questions to Pak Ashred and Warwick, good to see you both again. It's around FTAs. So really, are FTAs understood in the ASEAN region at boardroom level and at C-suite level, rather than C-level, C-suite level? And importantly, do people across ASEAN understand and appreciate and know how to access the advantages of FTAs? Thank you.
That's a great one, Ian. I'll repeat it because it's quite quiet online, but I got that from you. So should we take Martin's question, and then I'll put that first one to Arshad and Warwick.
Hi, Martin Barrow of the Jardine Mason Group. I share your enthusiasm, optimism, resilience, and the need for cooperation. I call cooperation the need for tech, T-E-C-H, teamwork, engagement, collaboration, and harmony. Now, I want to raise the subject of travel and tourism because that links in so closely with trade and investment. And it's particularly relevant now because the World Travel and Tourism Council will be having their annual summit meeting in Manila on the 20th to 22nd of April, and I will be going to that. And we need to look at all the measures. I mean, digitalization can play a key role in simplifying visas between us in both directions and all sorts of other things. But you know, trade and tourism over Britain is a huge exporter to the sector. You think of everybody from Rolls-Royce engines to liquid Scotch whiskey, whatever. So it's hugely important for the British economy, not just on visitor spend, and also the soft power of bringing more people together. So what more can we do to rebuild tourism and travel as quickly as we can between us all? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I might invite any remarks that you've got on that, ASEC Gepti. But if we start with the first one from Ian, which was around FTAs, and the question is around whether they're really fully understood and realised at C-suite level. So perhaps Pakashad, I can come to you first.
Sure, thank you. It's a very good question. It's something that actually we are doing something about it in Indonesia, because when we actually do a survey and whether people or companies understand about FTA, they say yes, it's FTA, but what's the advantage of FTA? How can they actually use FTA? That's something that is application of FTA. It's something that is still a stranger, you can say. So in a way, this is something that is a real problem that we have. And this where from our side as Indonesian Chamber of Commerce, what we are trying to do right now is actually we are looking into all the FTA between Indonesia and other countries. And what we are trying to do is actually now introducing this to all the companies in Indonesia. And not just that, but giving them better, creating through digital platforms. Now we are in the process of making it. We are creating, let's say, a digital platform of trades where we put actually all these trade agreements from various countries into that platforms, in which to make the education. So we call it, we even now in the creation of we call Wiki Wira Usaha, which is actually like a Wikipedia, which actually then tells a different narration of different FTA. But we need to also help, for example, what we are trying to do, we are making a piloting. Let's say one is one with Australia, and why? Because we have the SEPA, and then we have another one with Switzerland, for example, and also with others that we want to do. What we're trying to do right now is create that platform, digital platform, so that the focus is not just large corporation, because large corporation can easily perhaps access to that, but the SMEs, that is something that we are working on, and how to educate them, how to do for them to understand about FTA and what can they use for this FTA. Because if not, then what's the use of this signing all these agreements, right? And so that's what we are trying to do, and set up these digital platforms, creating this so-called trading houses digitally. And with all these agreements that is in place, we are doing this pilot thing. And actually for Indonesia is also to help Indonesian SMEs is what we call Indonesian Incorporated now. What we're trying to do is if we can do something together, then we can actually work together, for example, on supply chain. If SMEs to actually buy a space in a ship, they won't be able to just buy a big space. But if we actually incorporate every SMEs and we buy a bigger pie of the spaces, then we actually reduce that. And that will be useful also to be able to actually use the FTA. And we have also there to also build up our own, let's say, warehousing, whereby that warehousing, we say that can be used by the SMEs. So yes, it is. I think Indonesia have been signing a lot of FTA, bilateral, multilateral, a lot of that. But then the use of it, actually, not many companies, especially SMEs. So that's something I think is a homework that we are trying to do. And so that it's not just a paper or document, it's something that we can actually use and everybody have a benefits of that. Because right now, it's just they know it's an FTA, but what is benefit for us? That is something that we are educating to the companies in Indonesia, especially SMEs.
Thank you very much, Pakashad. Great to hear and sort of keen to work with you on that from the UK side as well. Warwick, I'm going to give you a choice of questions because one's come in that I want to put on the table for you, which is COVID has driven talk of onshoring and reindustrialization in some developed countries. Is globalization dead? ? So you might want to pick that one up. I'm afraid I need to be very tough and put a sort of 1 to 2 minute time limit on you so we can come in with the last question to Assistant Secretary Gepti at the end. But Warwick, is globalization dead?
I'm pleased to say no. I don't think so anyway. Sure, it's been challenged, and I think that came out in some of the comments, perhaps from Lord Grimstone earlier, that companies are re-looking at supply chains and re-examining them and so on and so forth. But I think we're seeing a continuation of a process which had begun well before COVID, which was people looking at the decisions which are made around sourcing. Really go back to the Trump administration and the trade actions on China, which resulted in a lot of companies looking at how they source in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, for example, Philippines, were all to some extent beneficiaries of that. So that sort of shifting around of supply chains has probably always been there, and I think the COVID situation has probably accelerated the thinking, particularly in relation to critical supply chains. And we should all keep an eye on this new announcements from the Biden administration this week around the Indochina Pacific economic framework, and that is talking about things like critical supply chains, and that may come into the sort of thinking on corporate decisions. And that just pulls me back to some comments, I guess, to that earlier question, which is corporate decisions and how are they framed in relation to free trade agreements. I think companies, and I think Astra made a very good point, which is that there is a difference between SMEs and bigger companies here who have the resources to understand FTAs and geopolitics and how they impact trade. And I think those big companies are definitely looking at the FTA frameworks. They regard them as another piece of really important infrastructure when making trade and investment decisions, the same as ports and airports and so on. And I think they definitely factor in the real tangible benefits of the agreements, things like around customs duties and market access and the empowerment of consumers, but also really importantly, the intangible aspects which come out of it. Dr. Rebecca touched on some of them there, which are all of the new generation trade agreements, the sort of factors that are in there. And what those trade agreements do is set a domestic reform agenda in a lot of the ASEAN countries. And that's a really important signal to investors once they sign up to an agreement, and that's a good thing for business that we like. And they also, looking at the sort of agreements that people are entering into or countries are entering into, give us a big clue around geopolitical risks and direction of travel. And if you look at a country like Vietnam that's entered into probably more of these FTAs and multilateral FTAs than anyone else in ASEAN, you're seeing Vietnam really give life to its foreign policy. I mean, I know Ambassador Long is in the room there, but Vietnam has a friends with all policy in its foreign affairs, and it really is reflected in its trade agreements. And I think that same sort of thing could be said of a lot of the ASEAN countries. Look at who they're negotiating with, what they're signing up to, and consider the sort of geopolitical signals that can send you, because that is going to impact your supply chain decisions. And I'll stop there because I know you've got a lot to ask, Sam.
Thanks very much, Warwick. Well, I'm afraid we're drawing to a close now. So, Martin, I think your question, I'll invite comments, one final round of comments from each of our esteemed panel, perhaps sharing with us one thing that you would like to see for UK trade and investment over the course of the next few years. Like, what will be the one game changer in your perspective? Because we really are against the clock. So I'm sorry to have to keep that such a tight and difficult question to answer. But ASEC Gepti, Martin was talking about he's coming to Manila for the World Tourism Council in April. Perhaps some reflections from you on tourism and trade in Manila, in the Philippines, and any final remarks you'd like to share. ASEC Gepti.
Thank you very much, Sam, for that question on trade and tourism. But before I give my view on trade and tourism, I hope you will allow me also to share some insights on the previous questions propounded by the audience. Basically, I would like to focus on two things: rules and digitalization, or technology for that matter. And to give my perspective on that, I would discuss three areas. I want to give context, second, considerations, and of course, the challenges. The context is that right now, we're still in the era of globalization. And the fast-paced technology, the advancement in technology, and the increasing interface of economies basically combined has revolutionized the way of doing business and also doing trade. And for that, we can see that as far as digitalization and technology is concerned, we can consider the same as an equalizer. because of technology, because of the platform of the internet, basically you can compete even with big companies. But another challenge is that, of course, the need for rules, because there has to be a clear rules of the game for doing business and for conducting trade. So that's the context. And the challenges basically are three aspects. One is that from the commercial perspective, of course, they all want stability. They want incentives. They want a fair business environment. So how do you deal with that? How do you address that? Another aspect is, of course, the social perspective, because with the emerging economies right now from Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, and the increasing concerns on other emerging subject matters like labor and environment. So there are many questions right now. How do you address labor, for example? How do you address human rights? How do you address environment or green technology for that matter? So eventually redounding to inclusive growth, because as we promote commercial activities, then there has to be inclusive growth. So that's the social perspective. And the third aspect is the perspective of public policy. And that's the biggest challenge, because from the government side, how do you balance this commercial perspective, the social perspective? And for you, the best way is, of course, to craft the necessary laws, rules and regulations that would lay down a stable and predictable environment. So that's what you can do. And again, in crafting policy, the balancing act is also very challenging. And I agree with Dr. Rebecca earlier, because the only way to do that basically is to have a rules-based system. That's the bottom line. That is why in new high-quality FTAs right now, the focus is no longer more on market access. The focus more is on the rules, because the rules basically is one great equalizer for all of us. And if you know how to make use of the rules, then basically even small businesses, and of course in particular the micro, small and medium enterprises, can benefit of what we are doing right now. Because FTA is just a policy tool. You have to utilize that. And it's good to know that the trend right now in high quality FTAs is that we're now talking about small and medium enterprises. And RCEP is one historic milestone, because we had an exclusive chapter on SMEs. But more than the chapter on SMEs, there are a lot of provisions actually that small businesses can avail of. Simple rules like transparency, inquiry points, focal persons, economic technical cooperation, and even chapter on competition can also help level the playing field. So that's why I like the question earlier propounded on how do you make sure that micro, small, and medium enterprises can avail of these FTAs. So it's a good thing that we have mechanism in place in the FTA itself, and that we have programs to promote the same. So I think that's one consideration, and we have to work on the increased utilization of FTA. And I'll go.
Hey, Getty, I'm so sorry to have to cut you off. I hope it's because we're such good friends that you'll forgive me, but we really have run out of time. Can I ask for your final reflection?
Yes, and then finally, on the issue of trade and tourism, that's a valid submission also. Because my view is that trade begets tourism and tourism begets trade. So I think in our post-pandemic recovery, it is very important that we put emphasis on these two sectors. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Asek Gepti. Really, really helpful. We'll go to two more remarks. Dr. Rebecca, then Dr. Huat. Can you give me one word that sums up your sort of final reflections for perhaps the challenges of the year ahead?
No, two words. Engage and consult. I think that's the way to go. If you're going to do FTAs, you have to engage, you have to consult business, civil society, intergovernmental bodies.
Thank you, Dr. Rebecca. And Dr. Huat, your two words or your one word?
I want to have three words. The first one is connectivity, among the business association and people. Second one is innovation, so digitalization. And the third one is sustainable development.
Thank you very much. Pakashad, your 1 to 3 words? Oh, you're still on mute, Pakashad.
Sorry about that. 3 words: advancing, innovative, inclusive, and collaborative growth.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Warwick, your 1 to 3 words.
Great. Sam, you asked for game changers in the next year for UK-ASEAN. I think I'll just say CPTPP. Keep it up, guys. That would be really a great outcome.
I share those sentiments entirely, Warwick. Thank you very much to our esteemed panel. I don't feel we were able to give you enough time to do you justice, but some really, really amazing reflections there from you. I'm going to hand back to London now for the last session, with apologies to Baroness Neville-Rolfe that my poor chairing meant we overran by 5 minutes. But hopefully colleagues in London found it useful to have these perspectives from Southeast Asia. Thank you once again, and back to you, Lucy.
Thank you so much for an excellent panel. And I'm going to move on swiftly to Amanda Milling, who is the Minister of State at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. She was due to come, but she had parliamentary engagement. And so she's recorded a video instead, which is a very good thing, because I'm sure she wouldn't have been able to come this morning, given all the developments in foreign affairs. So over to Amanda Milling.
In cutting-edge science and tech to forecast extreme weather, giving the public and businesses more time to protect themselves. When it comes to climate resilience, we know that well-managed urbanisation plays an important role. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to UK-ASEAN Business Council for organising this forum, and for all they have done to nurture UK-ASEAN cooperation, despite the challenges of COVID. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person today. Last year marked a landmark moment when the United Kingdom became ASEAN's first new dialogue partner in 25 years. This clearly demonstrates the UK's Indo-Pacific tilt and our long-term commitment to the region. With Southeast Asian countries reaching new heights of economic growth, it is really an exciting time to work together. We are currently agreeing a joint 5-year plan of action. Our focus will be on strengthening security ties, deepening economic partnerships, and addressing shared problems. Of these, climate change is, of course, the greatest challenge facing us all. So as we rebuild from this devastating pandemic, we must make sure that we do so sustainably. We've already forged some impressive and effective partnerships with ASEAN members on this. The UK's National Weather Service, the Met Office, has partnered with academic institutes in the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Together, they are using cutting-edge science and tech to forecast extreme weather, giving the public and businesses more time to protect themselves. When it comes to climate resilience, we know that well-managed urbanisation plays an important role, helping to mitigate risks, but also helping to create jobs and improve quality of life. This is why our Global Future City programme is working with several Southeast Asian countries, including the Philippines. It's helping to design a new central park for New Clark City that incorporates flood mitigation measures while promoting energy efficiency and protecting diversity. Yet climate change continues to pose an existential threat, and there's much more we need to do to protect our livelihoods, our biodiversity, and our coastal communities. We know that low carbon, sustainable growth is the right way and only way to go, and that the transition to clean energy must be at the top of our to-do list if we're to avert the most devastating impacts of climate change. It was wonderful to see so many countries make fresh net zero commitments at COP26 in Glasgow, including many ASEAN members. Because it's not just about doing the right thing for our planet. The economic case for action is equally strong. Investing in renewables and energy efficient infrastructure can generate twice as many jobs as investing in fossil fuels. Wind and solar energy are the cheapest forms of energy in 2/3 of the world. And by 2030, they'll undercut coal and gas nearly everywhere. Overall, the UK has doubled our international climate finance to £11.6 billion over 5 years. In ASEAN, we're supporting the remarkable ambition to catalyse $7 billion for a green recovery, pledging up to £110 million towards the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility. This will be a new source of lending to governments, enabling countries to invest in renewable energy and other new infrastructure that significantly reduces greenhouse gas emissions. British international investment will also play a key role. By 2025, it will mobilise £8 billion a year into decarbonisation and green growth. As public sector finance encourages these innovative instruments, private sector investors can benefit from huge opportunities in these new exciting projects. As we look to the future together, the United Kingdom will continue our commitment to a greener future in partnership with ASEAN. Of course, this is just one aspect of our deep and wide-ranging partnership and an example of the UK's increased efforts in the Indo-Pacific. I cannot end today without affirming the UK's support for ASEAN's continued leadership on the Myanmar crisis, which remains a deep concern. We echo the call for an end to the violence, for full and unhindered access to humanitarian aid, and for a peaceful resolution to the crisis. And we stand ready to assist ASEAN in its efforts. Together, we can meet the challenges we face and build a better world for all our people. Thank you.
And thank you, Minister of State. I have to say that what you said about climate resilience really comes home to us in the UK after the storms that we've had here and the low-lying nature of so many ASEAN countries. Together, I think we can learn and really tackle that. And I wanted to thank the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office and the Department for International Trade for their support today, and also all the ambassadors and high commissioners and their teams, the work that you do with business. And before battery's gone, but luckily you can still. We've had a few difficulties today, which I've enjoyed. Perhaps I could introduce Graham Stewart, who is Cambodia Trade Envoy, and Vietnam, and Laos, and Mark Garnier, who is Trade Envoy for Thailand, Brunei, and Myanmar. Graham.
Well, thank you, Lucy. Just a very quick word to say, part of the serious intent of the Prime Minister and the government in ASEAN is the appointment of trade envoys, and I'm the Prime Minister's trade envoy, as has been said, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, and turning the aspirations which Amanda laid out there into a reality of the ground, getting UK business, getting Vietnamese business together, and Cambodia and Laos businesses is what a trade envoy role is to do. Both Mark and I are former investment ministers, so we both did the job that Jerry did previously. It's funny how we go the other way around, but no. We're really keen to make sure that we can work with you, British business and business in ASEAN.
Thank you, Lucy. It's as Graham said rightly, sort of said we were both ministers in Parliament of International Trade. And as he pointed out a little bit earlier, the investment minister is getting older with each progression of the quite impressive. But I'd just like to echo what Graham just said. My role is a really important role. And actually, I'd also just like to, as I'm a trade envoy to Myanmar, just echo Amanda Milling's point about what's going on in Myanmar. It is unbelievably tragic. We've made a huge amount of progress in the last few years. And now, of course, that progress has been put back by what's happened in the last year. Having said that, trade still looks after people who live in countries like Myanmar. And I think it's very good that while we have forced sanctions against the business in Myanmar, we are at the end of the day, they're going to have trade certainly helps.
Well, thank you so much. And I think you could see we have continuity. I've also been a trade and investment minister, and we all want to help the trade and investment process and have long-standing relationships, even if the door revolves a little bit too fast. I'd now like to move on to our final session. Poor Matt Kavanagh of Prudential was going to chair this session, but I'm afraid he's gone down with COVID. So I've leapt into the breach, and I would like to invite Stuart Tate, who's head of commercial banking UK for HSBC, and the vice chairman now of UK-ASEAN
Business Council. I think it's his first engagement for us. So perhaps a round of applause for him onto the stage. And then online, Bernardino Vega, CEO of Pembankit Energy, Mandalay, and Chairman of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council for Indonesia. And of course, Indonesia to take over ASEAN next year. And it's good to see the ambassador here today. Thank you. And then finally, Eugene Wong, who's CEO of Sustainable Finance Institute Asia. So thank you very much indeed. We've heard Minister Milling's remarks, and she talked a lot about climate change. She didn't talk much about finance, but I wonder, Stuart, what whether you'd like to give us your views.
I may have to borrow your microphone. Thank you very much. Yeah, I've just returned from Asia. Actually, I had my latest 5-year stint with HSBC, so it's terrific to be part of the UK-ASEAN Business Council. I think really there's 3 key points that I'd like to make. And the first one is that the discussion around carbon, the transition, is very much a boardroom discussion. And that's taking place in both private entities and public entities. And as an organization, we have real insight into that. We were actually involved in about 50% of all offshore sustainable bond issues that took place in Greater China last year. And just in Hong Kong alone, there was 6.4 billion US of sustainable bonds issued in 2021, and we were involved in 2/3 of those. So it really is a privilege to be in the boardrooms and hear what companies and government institutions are talking about and the issues that they're trying to tackle. So I think that gives an idea of the magnitude of the issue and also the scale of it. My second point is public-private partnership is absolutely essential to meet the challenge. We've heard it mentioned several times today, actually, and it is critical. This is a very, very expensive transition. Some of the numbers that are being bandied around are quite mind-blowing. I was with a client last Friday working on hydrogen. I think they were talking about 1,200 plants are required, and these are $500 million US each. So even for large banks, even for the banking industry, this is something quite staggering. That's just hydrogen alone. And if you look back on the recent years, the annual financing gap for 8 of 11 Southeast Asian companies is over $100 billion US each year. And we suspect that will have worsened through the COVID period. Boston Consulting Group, they estimate the investment demand in Asia over the next 30 years is a really quite staggering $66 trillion. And of course, the UK economy is about 3 trillion. We're talking about 66 trillion of investment needed over the next 30 years. So for the finance industry, of course, it's a quite incredible opportunity to be a catalyst for change, to be really involved in this. But banks like us also have a responsibility to our customers and to governments to drive that change and to transition our own business to net zero. And we are very active with that. And of course, we welcome governments that are enabling that change. They can send very clear, very consistent signals so that companies like ours and our customers have the incentive to change and that they undertake the right behaviors. And my third and final point is that this issue of carbon transition means that there's a very ripe agenda for UK-ASEAN collaboration. No country, no set of countries can do it on their own. Of course, it is a global issue. So we do welcome the comments that we just heard from the minister. We welcome the comments that came from other government officials earlier today. I think there are clear signs of excellent government leadership and the commitments that have been made in the UK and in ASEAN. So it's critical that we're all active in sustainability, sustainable finance, that it's on the agenda, for the UK's plan of action with ASEAN. Thank you.
Stuart, thank you so much. And big cost and financial challenges means also big financing opportunities for the financial sector if you go about it in the right way. And HSBC is a long-standing brand, and it's obviously adapting, which I think is a lesson to us all. I'd now like to go over to our online guests and turn to Bapak Dino, who runs an energy company in Indonesia, which of course is ASEAN's largest country by far. And he, as I've said, is chair of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council for Indonesia. And like everywhere else, Indonesia needs low-cost energy to achieve its important development goals. Bapak Dino, can I invite you to give some opening remarks?
Thank you, Baroness Neville-Rolfe, and also thank you for
Can we put the sound up a bit?
Can you hear me right now?
That's much better, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Baroness Neville-Rolfe, chair of the UK-ASEAN Business Council, and thank you for inviting me for this occasion. It's really an honor, and I just heard our chairman, the chairman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce, Pak Arsyad, on the last session. I'd like to say that I've been involved in ASEAN for the last 20 years, and I started at the regional level. So the ASEAN economic community has been something that we at the private sector have been involved with. We've seen its struggles, its challenges, but also its opportunities and its successes. When we talk about energy transition, which is basically part of the Indonesian government agenda in the G20, this energy transition, the joint statement of ASEAN countries at the COP26 also provides this backdrop of what we call deep carbonization, right? So in the private sector, we're, and especially one that's in the energies field, we have, there's three basic parameters that we would like to see how it's deployed, right? You have initiatives and declarations, but how is it going to be executed on the ground level? And what kind of regulatory framework is going to dictate the type of energy transition? And I think based on my experience, and I think in all ASEAN countries, there are three premises that I would like to just lay out there in order for us to be a bit more realistic on how we would transition into this deep carbonization initiative. Number one, any transition to clean energy has to be what I call, in this region in ASEAN, what I call just transition. It has to be a just transition. We cannot disenfranchise groups of communities just by virtue of decarbonization, right? So clean energy is a good initiative. We all support that, but you cannot disenfranchise communities for the sake of decarbonization. That's my view. Two, I think there was a point that was raised by one of the questionnaires, and I'd like to raise that. I think one of the key elements is how do we transition this phase into decarbonization, and the focus should be also on energy efficiency. So it's not only on the supply side, but also on the demand side. So it goes both ways. So consumers have to be educated on how to also become more efficient and less, thus emitting less carbon. And the third, I think, in its deployment, in my experience, ASEAN consists of many island states, like in the Philippines and Indonesia, but it also consists of small cities in the Indochina region, right? So I think what we can do is identify these quick wins, these low-hanging fruits, maybe focusing on islands, like Indonesia is now initiating its first phase for decarbonization in the Lesser Sunda Islands, or we call the Sumba Islands, which will enable us to, pilot some of these initiatives before addressing the more urban areas. So that's probably my backdrop. And allow me, Madam Moderator, to also acknowledge my ambassador, Pak Desra Percaya. Selamat pagi, Pak, who's a colleague of mine, and we work closely between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and our chamber. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I've already, the ambassador is a good friend to ASEAN Business Council. So thank you so much. And thank you for adding energy efficiency and low-hanging fruit to our conversation. Extremely helpful. I now turn, if I may, to Eugene Wong, also online, and CEO of Sustainability Finance Asia, who are doing a tremendous amount in the green finance space in Southeast Asia, and serve as a secretariat for the ASEAN Taxonomy Board. Eugene.
Thank you very much, Baroness. Well, I'd like to start off by saying that ASEAN contributes to less than 5% of global emissions, but 4 of our ASEAN countries are among the top 10 nations globally most impacted by climate-related disasters during the 1999 to 2018 period. And owing to the social and economic diversity of our member states, as Pak Bernardino has mentioned, where our GDP per capita per annum ranges from 1,400 to 64,000 US dollars. Transition is a very important part of ASEAN's sustainability journey. We can't just flick a switch and turn green or be sustainability aligned overnight. And the central banks and capital market regulators have made it very clear in their sustainability roadmaps that we must avoid social and economic dislocations in this journey, and we need to have an orderly, just, and affordable transition. Well, 6 out of 10 of our member states have made their net zero ambitions very clear. However, the success of ASEAN's sustainability journey, like everywhere else, would hinge first and foremost on the availability of capital. As such, the central banks, the capital market regulators, insurance regulators have come together to reorient capital by significantly enhancing the sustainable finance ecosystem. And they're working to strengthen the 3 pillars of that ecosystem: taxonomy, transition, and disclosure. ASEAN's first attempt at common definitions of sustainability was to issue the regional standards for green, social, and sustainability bonds, which were done in 2017 and 2018. And issuances under those standards, which are either labeled or specifically aligned, have actually reached 24.5 billion as at the beginning of November last year. It's more interesting to note that the ASEAN Sustainability Bond Suite was very ahead of its time because it did not allow any form of fossil fuels. The establishment of the ASEAN Taxonomy Board to develop, maintain, and promote an ASEAN taxonomy was endorsed by the 7th ASEAN Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting held on the 30th of March last year. And that's a really pivotal step for us. Version 1 of the ASEAN taxonomy was recently issued on the 10th of November last year. And the ATB is overseen by the ASEAN Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting and hosted by our organization, the Sustainable Finance Institute Asia. Now, ASEAN is fully committed to advancing its sustainable finance agenda, and we are going to see many exciting things happening moving forward. And with that, I shall stop for now. Thank you.
Eugene, thank you, and thank you for being so succinct and clear. It gives me more time for questions. So perhaps people think about questions, put their hands up, or put their online hands up for Alan to see. Perhaps I could start with a question. Perhaps I'd ask you, Eugene, and others may want to come in. I'm quite interested in the right regulatory framework for this activity. It has been mentioned that that is a sort of move to the future. Do you think the regulations should be at national level? Should there be coordination across ASEAN? Is it a global matter? Eugene, you might want to start, and Stuart, you might want to come in on that as well.
Thank you. Well, I would say that the answer is yes to all 3. And because we operate at a national, regional, and global level, it's important to ensure the interoperability of frameworks. Let us take the taxonomy, for example. The taxonomy is an ASEAN taxonomy. It is designed to be the overarching guide and common language for ASEAN. But we also acknowledge that every ASEAN member state, it's allowed to have their own taxonomies because those taxonomies would allow them to address the national priorities. But what's important is that we are able to translate those taxonomies into one common language, because the last thing we want is fragmentation. It's a disaster to have that because investors spend an awful amount of money trying to do a due diligence on every project they're on. We're opening ourselves up to greenwashing, and really, we're not creating a consistent ambition for ourselves. So I think it's really important that while standards can differ at national, regional, and global levels to take into account specific needs at those levels, it is important for them to be interoperable and for us to be able to reconcile them.
Thank you. Stuart.
Well, it's so good to hear Eugene talking about taxonomy. I remember we had a panel 2 or 3 years ago, and we were saying exactly this, that for business to have clear taxonomy enables us to put the financing in from our industry that is so clearly needed. And, we have made public commitments, very firm commitments about the amount of financing that we do want to put in the market. And we've said, as HSBC as an organization, we're committing between 750 billion and $1 trillion by 2030. So we do need that taxonomy in place. And of course, that's a global exercise. So for us, it's about having the framework that allows us to invest, allows us to innovate, and provide the products and services that our clients need to be part of the transition journey. So we really do welcome that.
Thank you very much for that. I've got a question from Mohammed Amma Wasim. Are there any industrial collaboration programs on net zero? How can we reach out to work closely with Indonesian companies? I don't know who wants to take that first.
Let me try to take a crack at it.
Yeah, Pak Dino, please.
Baroness. So, well, the quick answer is we at the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce have a desk called the Business Support Desk, which will point you to the right directions. The Indonesian government has also designated several areas as green industrial zones. One area on the top of my mind is an area in North Kalimantan, which we designated to green industrial zone, which would require, the energy sources to be from renewable or clean energy, and also require a net zero emission in that zoned area. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Yeah, and in the finance industry, there are a series of bodies so that people can work together, again, for the benefit of the corporates. There is GFANZ, which is the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero. They reported at COP26, as people may have seen. There's the Net Zero Banking Alliance, NZBA, and that's actually a UN initiative which represents, or its members represent, 40% of global banking assets. So that really has weight behind it. And then the Financial Services Task Force, that was created by the Prince of Wales here in the UK, and it's chaired by our own CEO, Noel Quinn. So there are a number of financial services, not just banking, financial services industry bodies to progress the agenda.
I mean, obviously it's all very complex, this, and new. And one wonders how our communities, that's both in the UK, which you've mentioned Prince of Wales's work, and Southeast Asia, can better understand. I mean, is there a role for business in actually helping to educate society? So almost starting in the schools. Stuart, and I'll bring in Eugene.
I think we're all learning together. We're learning with our customers, we're learning with government bodies, and then we're learning internally. And so we're very active with training our relationship managers, and particularly with small and medium-sized enterprises who are very busy running their business day to day. We're trying to share with them what's happening in the larger corporations, how they're identifying, putting a strategy together, and then the financing needs that meet their own transition agenda. But it is very much, we're in the thick of learning as we move along.
Eugene, and I'm looking forward for questions from the floor as well. Eugene.
Well, definitely, I think it's good, Baroness, that we haven't underplayed the complexity because there are many moving parts. And I'm always tempted to say that it's good if someone takes the lead because we always need every little step to be taken. But it's important that businesses, being a sort of conduit to a vast stakeholder base, actually gets involved in this process. I mean, we also must consider that we're in this position because of the private sector. Businesses and commerce actually created the problems that we're having today with the climate, and it's naturally businesses and commerce that must help clean it up. So businesses are a natural conduit to promote awareness and educate society because, again, as I mentioned just now, the vast stakeholder base of customers, employees, suppliers, shareholders, and the communities they operate in allow them to play this role very well. And it's really an iterative process. They learn something, they pass it on to their suppliers, they pass it on to the customers, it comes back to them. And we hope that through businesses, we can create a really mutually reinforcing virtuous cycle.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the floor? Yes, please, Graham.
You can hear me, or should I wait? Thank you, that's much better. Could I ask what practical steps would the panel suggest to, I mean, we've seen Vietnam come forward at COP26 with surprisingly positive commitments there, and there's a real appetite to see those commitments converted into real change in Vietnam. What practical steps could we be taking to make sure that the British business community that can meet some of those needs most effectively does so?
I mean, Dino, why don't we start with you and then go to Eugene and then go to Stuart, who really the question is for, but I'd like to understand the broader answer. Dino.
So, yes, Baroness.
Thank you.
So my response would be, it would be best to identify, I revert back to the quick wins and pilot projects in ASEAN to promote the net zero emission. I think that's probably the best way. And the business sector, we will rely on the regulatory framework on how we will navigate this net zero emission. There are challenges up ahead, but I think the best way is just get the project done, identify maybe towns or islands that we could work with, and get it going. The other thing that I want to mention is the 800-pound gorilla in the room that we don't talk about, which is China, right? And China is going to surpass the U.S. in economic as the number one economy in the world, and this is the reality of the situation. All Asian countries, and especially the private sector in these Asian countries, is already assuming and taking preparation that China will be number one. So that's and I just want to throw that as a backdrop as we talk about these ideas. The reality on the ground. I mean, we're not quick, and I commend the UK-ASEAN Business Council for having such discussions like this. But we need to get boots on the ground, right? For us to move ahead, identifying quick wins. That would be my response, Baroness. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene.
Thank you. First off, I'd like to say that we really need to address local needs, and 6 out of our 10 member states have actually come up with net zero programs. So apart from Vietnam, you've got Malaysia for 2050, Indonesia for 2060, Thailand for 2065, Laos for 2050 as well. But the issue with ASEAN is that we don't have a plug and play situation. So in approaching ASEAN businesses and ASEAN parties to work with, it's much easier to use a sandbox approach or a gradual approach as opposed to trying for something very comprehensive. And there are certain opportunities which are very important right now. As you know, everyone's going to try and balance this transition with the economic well-being of businesses and communities. And this is where we need to be able to use sustainability as the new growth driver, because everyone's worried that sustainability means it's a bad thing for businesses, but that's not really true, because if businesses aren't sustainable, they're not going to last for very long. So one way, of course, is to help ASEAN businesses ride the supply chain. That's very important because SMEs particularly are the backbone of ASEAN, and ASEAN nations are very export driven, right? So the supply chain and customers also driving change, with MNCs willing to spend a lot more on net zero products and services. So this can be where economic growth and sustainability go hand in hand, and companies do need help in this. The second is to help ASEAN entities leverage on new industries that fit into the sustainability paradigm, such as, we see meat substitutes coming out, agriculture, nature-based solutions, carbon services, and also technologies that promote sustainability, because in ASEAN, we need new green areas to help bulk up the economy, and they can add up to $1 trillion or 6 to 8% of GDP by 2030. So there are lots of opportunities for British businesses with the technology and the skills to come in and provide that support.
Thank you. Stuart.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I suppose you'd expect me to answer from a money angle, so I should. I think I wrote down five key areas of activity for our industry. One is to allow companies to access the capital markets, especially the larger companies. So green bonds, but also sustainability linked loans and other products. So access the capital markets, access the debt markets. Secondly, at the other end of the scale, and I touched on it earlier, small and medium enterprises. So in terms of concrete action here in the UK, we recently issued a £500 million fund where we've basically carved out some capital to put modest loans into very small companies to help them with their transition. Thirdly, supply chains. Transparency was mentioned earlier. There's a trade finance organization. We can see deep into people's supply chain through payments data, through trade data, and often we can see down to third, fourth, even fifth tier suppliers. Are there good environmental practices amongst those suppliers? Are there fair labor practices as well amongst those suppliers? Fourth point, new technology. I got left behind after about 10 minutes talking about hydrogen last Friday, but I think we have a role to play to surface what's happening more on the venture side of things with emerging technology. And then fifth, and equally important with the others, I think, is we do have a center of excellence. Our own sustainability team is led by a former NASA climatologist who we've hired. She's building a center of excellence, and it's important that they engage direct with our customers to give the best advice that we can give to them from a financing perspective.
Excellent. I mean, I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to answer the question, but I'm going to anyway, because energy efficiency has been mentioned. Quick wins been mentioned. And some of you will know that I worked in retail for 15 years across parts of Asia. And we had a program that brought together energy efficiency, because we wanted to save money, and going green, because we were early adopters of concern about climate change. So we tried to have zero carbon stores, for example, trial those. And so those were practical things that other people could see and copy. And we put solar panels on the top of all the supermarkets, thus helping to save the planet and saving money for ourselves. And I mentioned this example because I think it brings together, the vision that so many of you have expressed with ways that even smaller companies can actually change things. And if we can get those sort of changes spread across ASEAN, I think it can make a really big contribution to sustainability and help us with resilience and the sea levels. I've got a question for, I suppose, for Pak Dino, because he made the point about just and fair transition. And I don't know if he'd like to expand on that a bit, and then perhaps ask Stuart whether he's thought about becoming a net zero bank.
So this is my experience, Baroness. For a coal-fired power plant, right, operating at about 1,000 megawatt a day, right, the price per kilowatt hours is about 5 to 6 cents. That's how much we charge the market, the consumers, for that. So, and for 100 megawatt solar power, right, or wind power in Indonesia, that price can be 3 times that, about 15 cents. So in order for us to transition into clean energy, the cost to the consumers cannot be less competitive than what we already have. That's what I mean. That's a good example of what we call a just transition. So if you're going to pass on these costs to the consumers at 3 times the amount of what they're already paying with a coal-fired plant, we need to find a better solution. This is an example. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great example. Stuart.
Yeah, it starts with us, and like your firm, you were well ahead of your time, perhaps. But whether it's our buildings, our vendors, our own travel, our own people, we must and we are committed to lowering our emissions. And I think we're in a unique position because of our large client base, companies and individuals around the world. We use our financing to support companies as they transition, and we've made public statements about our coal policy, more recently about oil and gas, and it doesn't stop there. But it does take time and it does cost money for our client base to transition. We would rather be involved in that to help them with their transition and support them on that multi-year journey on many occasions.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I had a very happy experience. I'm chair of a company that's in the Bluefin building, just near the Tate Gallery, which are Crown agents. And we, like every other company, had to fill in one of these forms about what emissions we were giving off as a company. And we discovered that because we got a green energy system in the Bluefin building, that we had less of a problem than we thought we had. And that had been done actually quite independently and was helping all the companies in that same building. And I'm sure there are many other Canary Wharf buildings.
I should probably add there's a risk angle to it as well. We do lend to many companies. They may find themselves quickly cut out of business because consumers will vote for their feet. People will not buy their product, or larger companies may not buy their product. So for us, of course, it's the right thing to do. But there is also a risk angle in terms of protecting our shareholders and our capital.
Okay, I think we're probably on to the final question. Eugene, your institute is working on the ASEAN taxonomy, as we've discussed. What are the opportunities for collaboration as the UK and ASEAN are developing their taxonomies at the same time? Could the UK be a gateway for ASEAN? Could that extend into the EU? Could that become a more global standard? I think we've lost him. So we'll have to send him the question. I think it was quite a difficult one. Did you hear that? No. Okay, well, look, can I just ask Stuart and Eugene if they'd like to say anything finally, probably in three words.
3 words. I'll do it in 2. Action and partnership. And I don't think that surprises anybody when we think about what was discussed today. Action, because of course words and statements provide the framework, but the onus is on us to be practical. And hopefully I was able to provide some practical examples that we're doing as an industry. And partnership, because it is a shared ambition. Nobody can do it alone. And I think for UK and ASEAN, we very much can form an agenda between us and take practical steps.
Thank you. Great. Eugene?
Well, I apologize for being kicked out just now. I'm back. But I gather these are my parting words. And I'd like to end where Stuart started. And that is really, this is not a national problem. It's not a regional problem. It's not a global problem. It is a global problem. So we need to solve this with global partnerships, and we need to there's no better time than now to get together, stand up and act together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Pak Dino?
Yes, Baroness. So I just want to just reiterate those 3 words that are on the top of my screen. Innovative, which and Stuart raised that on in terms of technology. It should be inclusive, just the transition, and also collaborative, which Eugene pointed out that we need to do so all together and work in partnership. Thank you.
Well, look, thank you all very much indeed. Excellent panel, excellent answers to very difficult questions. Perhaps we give the panel a round of applause. And then before we end, it's my absolute pleasure to invite His Excellency Ambassador Kan Paridar, the Cambodian ambassador, to the stage to deliver some concluding remarks. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Very good afternoon. Lord Gramstone of Bakun, Minister of Environment, even though he's not here. The Right Honorable Amanda Milling, Minister for Asia of the FCDO. Excellency Pan Sorosak, Minister of Commerce of the Keynote Cambodia that he delivered in this morning. His Excellency Dr. Lim Chok Hoi, Secretary General of ASEAN, and Baroness Neville Robb, Chair of the UK-ASEAN Business Council. Excellencies, Ambassador of ASEAN, my colleagues, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to congratulate and commend the joint effort of the UK-ASEAN Business Council, the Department of International Trade, and the ASEAN Business Advisory Council for organizing such a great success UK-ASEAN Business Forum on a future redefined. I would also like to express my sincere appreciations for the presence of Your Excellency, Honorable presenter, speaker, and moderator, and all participants to this forum in person and also jointly virtually will contribute to the success of this forum. I would like to acknowledge the fruitful and useful outcome of this forum, which come from the contribution of all presenter, speaker, and participant. At the forum, I'm pleased to know that we have had a very constructive and candid exchange of view covering all topics on a future redefined UK-ASEAN trade and investment and a sustainable partnership. We also have learned on how ASEAN and the UK and relevant players wish to engage and to work in partnership for rebuilding and recovery and sustainable growth in the post-COVID-19 phase and to promote the trading between the UK and ASEAN. In this regard, I recognize that the finding for ASEAN member states and the UK to address the needs of strengthening their capacity, expertise, and enhance ASEAN-UK cooperation on trade in goods and services, digital economy, climate change, supply chain landscape, among others, to ensure a sustainable, fruitful against the backdrop of COVID-19. This useful finding would also be a good reference and input for our permanent representative to ASEAN in Jakarta and the British ambassador to ASEAN to consider when drafting the plan of action to implement the ASEAN United Kingdom Dialogue Partnership from 2022 to 2026 of future cooperation to be adopted by the first ASEAN UK Foreign Minister meeting in Phnom Penh in August this year. Therefore, if I may suggest, I would like to convey to you, Baroness, the outcome of this first forum would be sent to our CPR and the British ambassador to ASEAN for consideration, where applicable, to be included in the draft of the plan of action to implement the ASEAN United Kingdom Dialogue Partnership for 2022 to 2026. Finally, may I conclude by wishing all you good health, happiness, and success in your endeavor, and stay safe. May I invite you to give a big applause to the organizer. Thank you for your attention.
Ambassador Khan, thank you. That was brilliant. It's been a great pleasure to work with you, and I look forward to continuing to do so in the year ahead. Now, as it happens, you are about to send a letter to His Excellency John Lam, our ambassador to ASEAN, who's of course based in Jakarta. And I'm glad to say we've managed to get hold of John Lamb to say a few words. John, welcome. Over to you.
Many thanks, Lucy, and also many thanks to Ambassador Khan. I was making careful notes as you were speaking, and normally I would say I'm, really sorry not to be joining this event in person. But actually, this week of all weeks, I have a very good excuse, since the International Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan was here yesterday, and I was with her meeting the ASEAN Secretary General here in Jakarta. But Minister Pan Sorosak, Dato Lim Jok Hoi, Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. It's a real pleasure. And before I say the rest of my kind of closing remarks, I'd like to really thank the UK-ASEAN Business Council and the ASEAN Business Advisory Council for organising such an excellent event. Certainly from my perspective, I feel extremely lucky that we have such good partners, and they really provide a vital bridge for us to engage with the business community in the UK and ASEAN. And it's been fantastic. I've been listening into the sessions throughout the day. It's been great to hear from so many friends and colleagues as you've been discussing. I've also got a longer list of people that I need to meet when I'm back in London and as I'm traveling around the region. I wanted really to, if I may, to say three things. One is about the way that the UK government is approaching the ASEAN relationship and why it matters so much to us. The second is how important we see the relationship with the private sector and the economic component of our ASEAN relationship. And thirdly is to very briefly look ahead at what the next year might hold. So first, I think and hope it's very obvious that the Indo-Pacific region, and ASEAN in particular, sits right at the heart of UK foreign policy at the moment. And the UK is extremely pleased and proud that we are ASEAN's newest dialogue partner. And we see that, and we have been welcomed into ASEAN as a new family member. So that gives us this fantastic platform to take forward our engagement. Now, as I mentioned, we had Anne-Marie Trevelyan here yesterday and the day before here in Jakarta. That was fantastic. She's in Japan today and will be in Singapore tomorrow. And I think that's, another sign of how seriously we are continuing to engage in the region, how much more will be coming in future. The other major event for us from the government perspective was in September of last year when Liz Truss, Anne-Marie Trevelyan's predecessor, agreed the joint economic declaration between the UK and ASEAN. And for us in government, that gives us a fantastic framework. We've now agreed 11 priority areas that we will be taking forward in the relationship with ASEAN. Ambassador Khan was just talking about the plan of action that we are going to negotiate now with ASEAN. That's the 5-year plan of what we'll be doing concretely together. And that's hugely exciting for us. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the role of the private sector. So as many of the speakers today have highlighted, COVID-19 has amplified a lot of the pre-existing economic challenges that we're all facing. And to have a properly sustainable recovery, we all need to work together. Now, for us, it's absolutely clear that that means governments working hand in hand with the private sector. And that's been our approach throughout. So last year, we were delighted to have Prime Minister Boris Johnson addressing the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit under Brunei's chairmanship. Similarly, at the economic ministers meeting that I mentioned, Patrick Nolan, the vice chair of UK-ASEAN and former global head of corporate banking at HSBC, joined and spoke to ministers. We'll be doing exactly the same kind of thing, bringing in business voices to our government engagement throughout the year ahead. And actually, we've been doing it in many other areas, our Race to Zero dialogues, our digital business showcase, the work that we're doing with ASEAN on sustainable infrastructure. So we're really grateful to you, to your companies for that engagement. We think it's hugely beneficial to the UK and to our ASEAN partners. Now, thirdly, I just want to touch briefly on the year ahead of us. So I think it's clear that we see this as a growing partnership. We see many opportunities coming down the track for closer engagement. And I think, as we've heard throughout today, there are still a lot of untapped opportunities for UK businesses, for ASEAN companies, and for partnership. So in all of the things that we're doing in the year ahead, we are incredibly keen that the private sector and the public sector partnership continues to grow and flourish. So if any of you have ideas on that, if any of you want to get in touch with me, with our mission here in Jakarta, that would be incredible. And we would look forward to welcoming you here in the region once that's possible too. So finally, many thanks from me for this wonderful event. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure. And I'll hand back to you, Lucy.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the ambassador. And I want to say that I think without John, the speed with which we managed to secure dialogue status with ASEAN would not have been achieved. He sits there in Jakarta. I look forward to taking a business delegation to see him in due course. And of course, to seeing him and others of you at Phnom Penh for the summit in the autumn. Before we conclude, I'd just like to invite Stuart Tate back to the podium to say a few words.
Baroness Lucy, you've been incredibly busy this morning. Thank you on behalf of everybody. And you brilliantly stepped in as a moderator there. I was very happy with that. Thank you. So Baroness Lucy, Ian, ministers, ambassadors, high commissioners, and everybody who's joined us here in our building this morning. All that's left for me to do, it's the best part of the day, I think, is to say thank you. Thank you very, very much for joining us for what I think you'll agree has been a very productive morning of discussions. It's a particular honor for me to be involved. I've just stepped into the vice chair role of UK-ABC, and I really am passionate about the growth and the opportunities that are in ASEAN, having lived and worked there and having one child born there. And I started my career in Singapore nearly 40 years ago. So it's terrific to be here. Working with our customers, we've seen examples of things that you heard about today. Innovation in business practice, ideas that are coming to the fore and we all need to nurture, whether it's in digitization, it's in sustainability, it's in trade, it's in investment, in skills, and on goes the list. And as we heard from our respective ministers, these are all areas where there's a real meeting of minds between the UK and ASEAN and within ASEAN itself, and a meeting of minds in business, as well as in government. And that's why it's an incredibly exciting time to be involved in this corridor in these two regions. So thank you again for coming. I'd be delighted if you could stay with us, those that are in London, for a little bit longer, because there is a light lunch that'll be served just outside the room here. And it's not very often that you get a free lunch from your friendly banker. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. It's an absolute delight to have you as the Vice Chairman of UK-ASEAN Business Council. I look forward to doing many more events with you, or indeed leaving you to do some events. Thank you all very much indeed for coming today. Thank you obviously to HSBC for being such brilliant hosts. A wonderful event, even despite the complexities of multimedia, which we're all having to live with these days. It's been wonderful to see all of you in person. And I look forward to the next opportunity, actually, to get together to do more business in ASEAN, both across ASEAN and with individual countries, ambassadors and high commissioners. I did want to put on formal record my particular thanks to our sponsors, not only HSBC, but also Prudential, and wishing Matt a rapid recovery from COVID, and ACCA, who are here. Thank you for your sponsorship. As Stuart said, please do stay and join us for lunch. The informal bit of these events is very important. And I thank you for staying with us for so long. It has been a long session. I think we've achieved a lot. So have a good day. And I look forward to seeing you again in the coming months. Thank you.